Okay, why don't I go ahead and get started with the introduction, and maybe
Thank you.
by the time I'm through introducing
Something.
this and Alexandra will be you'll be ready. Everybody will be on board and ready to get going. Just a little bit of background first. And this is as much for those who are at the school as for those of you who are visiting us via Zoom. One of the very interesting things about the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture is how robust our research enterprise is. We've got two arms to it here, and it's not done by topic, but actually by mode of engagement. Our Center for Sustainable Development handles all of our funded research. So that's research that's really very much focused on deliverables. We do have the most in-house grants and the most in-house capability for managing grants of almost any architecture school in this country. And we manage grants everywhere from the very many that we do with the city all the way to NATO. It's a stunning capability to have that in-house. So many schools of architecture have to depend upon engineering schools, or they depend upon centralized support of that. That is something that we have fully as in-house capability here, which has been quite remarkable way to support our faculty and their research. But there's another piece of this that really matters. And it's a piece that we've also formalized in the last few years, very much due to sort of leadership of Michael Benedict over the years, and now the direction of Lior Vysotsky, who we've just seen sort of disappear as she's trying to manage Sanford, who, as you know, is difficult to manage. It can be difficult to manage. He's a good friend of so many of us, so we can say those things about Sanford. But with the Center for American Architecture and Design, which Lior is the director of, which Michael Benedict spearheaded and brought his intellect to bear for so many years. We see that as, where we have discourse. It's where we convene. It's where we have the voice of the school. If we've got one part that's about deliverables, sort of dealing with the actual sort of impact and implementation of our research, then this is on the other end of it is, how do we ask better questions? How are we more provocative? What territories should we be exploring? It's where we do a lot of the open-ended conversations. And one of the sort of wonderful things about CAD, CAAD, is that it particularly supports our younger faculty in the development of whether it's a development of a particular approach or sort of like a way of opening up discourse. And we have a program called the Meadows Foundation. I have to read this. Meadows Foundation Centennial Fellowship at the Center for American Architecture and Design, which, hi Sanford, which we have a fellow every 2 years that receives that. It's a 2-year fellowship. What's been remarked, I think there might be some overlap, but anyway, it's a 2-year fellowship for each person who participates. They have an opportunity to sort of work with a group of faculty supporters. They have the opportunity to develop a symposium, an exhibition, a publication from it. But the most important thing about this fellowship is not so much the deliverables that come out of it, but the series of questions that emerge as one is going through that. And so we've had a remarkable string of Meadows Fellows. And what's been very interesting about them is there's actually sort of a very neat string that connects almost all of their research projects. If we think about Cisco Gomes and his original work, which he's continuing to do right now while he's on leave, on low cementitious masonry units. to, what Lee Dangle did by sort of like looking into timber in a way that was actually quite different than the larger discourse in timber, but sort of peeling apart sort of multiple aspects of how one dealt with it agriculturally, how one actually deals with it in terms of, the methods of construction and implementation. It was sort of like a different window into working with timber than the one that we normally see. To Danelle Briscoe, whose absolutely gorgeous exhibition and just came down on Other Nature, but the amazing publication is out on that, and actually quite exciting just to show you where some of these things go. She's going to be having doing an event with the city of Austin next week, looking into and actually sort of teaching them about the demonstration projects that she did with how you actually integrate plant material into building facades. As many images as we've seen of that, sort of like looking at this from a long-term demonstration and measurement project has revealed some very interesting things. And so for the city that's interested in doing this, this is a very key aspect for them and an important sort of stage for them moving forward on that. And that brings us to Alex and her stunning work that we are going to be talking about today, that has not only been part of what she has been doing for this Meadows Fellowship, it's what she has both gleaned from much work that she has done over her career, as well as what she's also been currently testing with her students. For those of you who don't know Alex, between the time she had her diploma from the AA in London and did her doctorate at Harvard with Sanford, she was an architect working out of Italy with her partner in a firm called, I'm going to pronounce, I can spell it, Ion.
Perfect.
And if you look at that work, the sort of exquisite exploration, but also in terms of the way that it sort of asked the architectural questions through multiple means of not sort of representation, but through what you might call sort of certain types of models that were explored through it. It's really incredibly provocative and beautiful work. And so I've known Alex for quite some time, but I tell you what really pointed me to sort of paying attention even more to Alex was seeing what she was doing as a doctoral student at Harvard. And so when we had an opportunity to hire someone to join our faculty, she was highly sought after, and we're thrilled beyond measure that she joined us 3 years ago. And I think what is so amazing about her work and what she is bringing to not only this symposium, but to the questions that are being posed by this symposium and the very framing of this, is this sort of like multimodal engagement with trying to understand sort of like how to peel back to getting to the appropriate questions within that. The work that she did as a doctorate, what we might think of as being fairly pro forma, and starting to sort of understand a history of how sustainable codes came about, has revealed, stunning information about how decisions were made, about which things were privileged, about a lot of things that were misunderstood. These are the kinds of questions, these deeper questions that we need to be asking as a field. But to see her also bring that into the way that we think about design, the way that sort of we examine things that we might, for example, in this time where there's great love of biophilia and biomimicry, where we might sort of like launch ourselves into a particular kind of way, even the nature at which she's sort of peeling back to ask questions, to sort of frame it through different kinds of modes of inquiry and models, are ones that are actually opening up new territory for design. So we think about it in that sustainability might have been an entry point into it, but what the exit point of it is going to be will be in manifold areas within it. It's actually an absolutely thrilling thing to watch. It's also why Harvard gave her the Wheelwright Prize, the incredibly prestigious Wheelwright Prize, 2 years ago, or I guess it was I'm totally lost with time with COVID. It could have been a decade ago at this point, but I think it was 2 years ago.
2 years.
And unfortunately, a lot of the travel part of it was preempted by COVID. So we're really looking forward to where that goes as well. But this is a big piece of it. And I turn it over to you, Alex. I'm so excited to be here for this discussion today.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for this amazing introduction. I really appreciate all your support. I'll just jump straight into it because I want to introduce the event and then let my speakers speak. So welcome to Plant Potential, a collective expedition into the imaginary futures of the spaces of botany, with field notes for an architect. Human activities, construction first among them, thrive on minerals. Vital to our lives today, they were once an essential support to emergence on life on Earth. And yet, as Vladimir Vernadsky first intuited in 1928, living matter has in turn been perpetually reforming those minerals since then. Life makes geology. What's more, life makes the atmosphere, as James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis proposed later, breathable as well. Next to photosynthetic bacteria, whose ancestors once adapted to life in plant cells, plants are the only life forms capable of directly capturing energy from the sun to perpetuate these vital cycles of formation and regulation. To put it simply, plants are the foundation of animal life on Earth. They're also our direct line to the sun. And yet, convinced of our ability to synthesize our future welfare out of hydrocarbons and minerals, we have estranged ourselves from plant intelligence. Ignorant of the importance of photosynthetic life, we humans are the culprits of the sixth extinction. Unaware of its cultural significance, we moderns have let go of the indigenous plant wisdom. We have become plant illiterate. Whereas the loss of biodiversity will strikingly impact resource availability, it has already, although less noticeably, reduced vast regions of Western life into a cultural desert. Ironically, we Westerners also built the first crystal palaces to enjoy the beauty of exotic plant specimens and speculate on their economic value. Today, we build them in the name of conservation and, of course, to grow produce. The question that begs an answer is whether the ideas and solution incubated under glass will help us come out into the open to take care of the Earth and its multi-species communities that thrive on unbounded plant potential. In this multi-part project, I kept the recent revival of interest in botanical greenhouses running in the background, if not simply at bay, to focus on investigative and creative initiatives that actually help human communities reconnect with their expanded environment and its ecological, cultural, and spiritual dimensions by embracing the nurturing potential of plants as food, material resource, environmental makers, companions, and perhaps teachers. At times under glass, but most of the time out there in the open where plants belong. In addition to today's event, Plant Potential culminates with the launch of a project website, plant-potential.world. And the site has been live for a couple of days now, thanks to the amazing work of Tenderling Design. Thank you, Tenderling. Next to the conference recordings that will be available on the website after this event, the platform hosts student design work from the advanced studio that I led in spring 21. And this was possible thanks to a collaboration with Hui Ku Maoli Old Plant Nursery on Oahu in Hawaii. And it was facilitated by the Honolulu-based artist architect and dear friend, Sean Connolly. Rick and Sean, thank you. The site also already houses the Plant Potential Conversation series, both full audios and recordings, short excerpts of the recording that I conducted as part of the studio last spring. And the collections of early botanical conservatories.
Okay. Like my phone was dead, so I didn't know what it was. I was like, at first.
Relied. Thank you. The collections of early botanical conservatories relied on plant specimens brought back home by naturalists who participated in exploratory expeditions. In this series of conversations that are available on the website, I actually gathered field notes from a very different type of expedition. Rather than bringing back plants, we speculated with, among others, botanist Stefano Mancuso, ecologist Stuart Pym, and artist Mark Dion, to plant seeds for a new way of thinking about plants and our relationship with them. As Michelle mentioned, as Dean Addington mentioned, the Plant Potential Project was possible thanks to the Meadows Foundation Fellowship and the Center for American Architecture and Design. It comes after Other Nature, the event that Danielle Briscoe curated last year. And again, as mentioned before, this volume is now available if you can see it. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, it's here. And hopefully it will also set the stage for Maggie Hansen's event next year, which is entitled Civic Care, Cultivating Community on Common Ground. The three of us definitely believe in plants. I really want to thank, before I introduce my speakers, I want to thank the CAD, especially its managing director, Leora Wysotsky, who has really patiently supported me in this project at all its stages. I want to thank Nadia Otto from the business office for all the logistical support, and Kelsey Stein, who is our communications coordinator, for helping me get the word out there. Thank you all. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to 5 guests whose approaches vary greatly in scope and character. They're all very different, but who are all rethinking and enriching our relationship with the environment by embracing the nurturing potential of plants. Although in very different ways, the work of each of my guests crosses the conventional disciplinary boundaries to get to the core of what they consider urgent, neglected, or perhaps simply more in tune with our true inner nature. Please welcome philosopher, writer, and editor Sanford Quinter, artist and socio-ecological researcher Oliver Kellhammer, architectural scientist Mei-Ling Loco, urban gardener Ron Finley, and artist-architect Roth. Thank you all for being here. I will first, my guests will first give a very short presentation, literally 10 minutes. I will introduce each of them as we move through the presentations, and then we will have the main conversation, and to hopefully after that have a little bit of time for also an open discussion with the audience. So I would like to start with Oliver Kellhammer. Oliver is an artist, writer, and researcher who seeks, through his botanical interventions and social art practice, to demonstrate nature's surprising ability to recover from damage. His projects explore the processes of ecological regeneration in the wake of human disturbance, either through passive field observation of biota recolonizing industrial wastelands, or by actively engaging in the biological and socio-political processes that inform these landscapes. His past projects include a community access biomaterials plantation, reforestation of an eroded railway ravine, where the vegetation is now actually protected as intellectual property, and working with squatters in Canada's poorest neighborhood to establish the country's first public permaculture food forest and Asian ethnobotanical arboretum. His recent work has focused on the psychosocial effects of climate change, decontaminating polluted soil, reintroducing prehistoric trees to landscapes impacted by industrial logging, and cataloging the biodiversity of brownfields. Kellhammer holds a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of British Columbia. He has lectured and given talks on bioart, ecological design, urban ecology, and permaculture at universities and cultural institutions throughout North America and abroad, and is currently a lecturer in sustainable systems at Parsons in New York. Oliver, welcome. If you want to share the screen, it's all yours.
Yeah, let me just share my screen here.
Thank you.
Okay, share, and I'm just gonna play, and you should see the first slide of the conservatory. Good, okay. When Alexandra first got in touch with me, she mentioned she found this long ago image of mine. It was a public art installation. She was looking for artists working with conservatories. And this work was called the Ghetto Conservatory. And it was proposed for a clearing in a lush temperate rainforest in Vancouver's Stanley Park. Vancouverites really love that park because it maintains an illusion of a pristine landscape that's largely been obliterated by industrial forestry. But the work would have enshrined an ecology more typical of elsewhere, maybe a post-industrial, not yet gentrified zone, like on the outskirts of, say, Bridgeport, Connecticut, or pretty much any other place where industrial jobs have come and gone. So my plan was to put in debris from a ruined building as a substrate for plantings of ailanthus, black locust, princess tree, mugwort, and that kind of thing. And the conservatory would have been climate controlled to replicate the uncomfortable conditions of an urban heat island. I even wanted to put in some rats and starlings and maybe some pigeons to add some authentic animality. But sadly, the project was never realized. But these represents a lifetime fascination of mine with what's been called the third landscape. This notion of a ruderal ecology, from the Latin rudis for rubble, ever since I was a kid growing up in an industrial zone in Toronto, when I played in an abandoned generating station and explored factory backlots near my house. We constantly encounter spaces like this out of the corner of our eye. It's like a botanical optical subconscious. Sometimes it's repulsive, but often it's full of historicity and potentiality, and it's certainly worth a closer look. Here you can see a similar terrain, a front yard in downtown Toronto, heavily contaminated with lead fallout from a smelter in a neighborhood I was living in back in the 80s. My first intervention was called Park, and it was to do almost nothing except encourage the growth of some previously suppressed weeds by making a fence to keep out the overzealous bylaw officers, along with a few simple security features. But then I took the same piece of terrain and did this second work called Lead Down the Garden Path, which is a full-on phytoremediation, which was a more heroic attempt to remove the toxic lead using cover crops of buckwheat, which is known to absorb heavy metals. Later, decades later, I did a work called Concrete Island, and again, very little work was actually done, but draw attention to what I would call a palimpsest or a hyperecology that had assembled itself within these concrete highway barricades. And the plants in there, this is in Vancouver, they exactly mirrored the layers of human settlement with indigenous black cottonwood growing side by side with Scotch broom and Himalayan blackberry out of a pile of trash. And I added some botanical labels to connect the viewer to a 1-800 number, which had recordings of the histories of how these plants actually got there. A little earlier, I did a work called Healing the Cut, Bridging the Gap, and this is what I would call botanical triage or botanical intervention on a very damaged ravine that was once thickly wooded, was destroyed during a bridge construction. So I installed a Band-Aid of hundreds of willow and cottonwood cuttings, as well as bird nest boxes, in order to create a seed rain from their droppings. After this, I just let Nature 2.0 take its course, and this lush forest started to establish itself on the botanical scaffolding that had stabilized the slope. The concept of timecraft is important here, in which a small intervention staged at the right time can amplify the land's natural healing ability. You can see the beginning, planting these willow cuttings, birdhouses and me scrambling up and down a cliff, gradual growth of cottonwood cuttings, slope is stabilized, and then lo and behold, the natural forest comes in. And as Alexandra mentioned, this forest has some intellectual property rights around it because it's a piece of art. Similarly, what you would call a ruderal landscape, it's kind of been digested by capitalism and passed out, but it can serve as an autonomous platform where emergent and participatory plant-human relationships can evolve outside of property and top-down state control. I co-founded Cottonwood Gardens in the early 90s with these other low-income squatters in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which is Canada's poorest neighborhood. So 30 years later, it's the largest permaculture site in the country. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is we used a lot of ruderal plants such as black locust and Scotch broom already present on the site to function as nurse crops to enhance the soil and control erosion. Again, amplifying the site's natural ability to fix itself and making it more suitable for urban farming and reintroducing native flora. This is what I call the time craft again. So you can see the gradual transformation of the site into a lush permaculture site and arboretum. And again, here's a ruderal plant called Scotch broom, and interplanted was the locust to shade it out. So gradually it evolved into this other landform. This piece means production I did with a youth group not far from the first site. And this is the plan to create microeconomic opportunities in an inner city urban park that are around materials. So willow, bamboo, princess tree, dye, paper-making plants, all are cultivated here by volunteers. It also works as an erosion control feature because the hill used to cause flooding. This is what I call an open source landscape. People actually keep changing the landscape. I created a scaffolding, but really it keeps changing according to the users of the site. It's not fixed. So you can see the willows and they get harvested and made into beautiful things by these craftspeople. And the site is constantly in flux. And this is just taken last year during the pandemic. These are some folks harvesting timber bamboo I planted like 20 years ago. So it keeps going on and on. And I wanted to just sort of finish with this notion of hyperecologies and hyperorganisms. I really wanted to talk about some of the work I've been doing around speculative botany and responding to the climate emergency. One of the things that you notice in ruderal spaces is that indigenous and immigrant biota form hybrids. Like, for example, there's this bittersweet vine that is actually a hybrid between American and indigenous American and Asian species, and it's growing all over the Northeast. The coyote also is a three-part mix of wolf, dog, and prairie coyote, the eastern coyote. So I thought I would try to manually create hyperorganisms. And so this is a Bartlett pear grafted to a hawthorn, which protects the pear from deer browse, from overpopulating deer. And it's also very drought tolerant and heat tolerant. So this creates, delicious food plants that are resistant to the depredations of climate change. And taking this climate change thing one step further, this is a work called Neo-Eocene, and it sort of explores the dialectic between just speculating and actually doing something. So in this project, I planted hundreds of trees from more southerly zones, like California and sort of warm temperate Asia. Trees like redwoods and sequoias and ginkgos, and planted them way up in Canada, north of the 50th parallel. And these trees were prehistorically native, meaning that they grew 55 million years ago during the last period of global warming, when there was like a massive carbon release during the Eocene thermal maximum, hence the name Neo-Eocene. And that back then, there were like palms and alligators in the Arctic. So this was an industrial clear cut, so logged, and then we planted these prehistorically native trees. Now, this created quite a bit of controversy because the trees, a lot of biologists says you shouldn't introduce these trees because they're not native. But we're wondering then, what is the cutoff? When is something considered native? Because they were native 55 million years ago. So it's very interesting. So I feel that adapting things to climate change means to go much, much further back, like before human history. And you can see here's a fossil of ginkgo and redwood from British Columbia, in a northerly region. And these trees are doing very well. The terrible droughts that we've had in the Pacific Northwest have actually been fine for the redwoods up in Canada, and not so great for the recently native plants. This is Rupert Sheldrake and Merlin Sheldrake. Merlin is a well-known mycologist, and they're collaborators on the project. So these trees have gotten quite big in the past 10 years. And there's another version of it done in Malmo, Sweden, in the flight path of the Copenhagen airport. These are ginkgos arranged in heat spirals. Again, a species that will likely thrive during climate change. And these ginkgos are kind of a symbiont for us. They're planted all over cities. They're almost extinct in the wild, and they were literally saved by Buddhist monks from extinction like hundreds of years ago. But now the ginkgo is a plant that actually is very resilient because it kind of goes back to the days of the dinosaurs. So just lastly, this idea of speculative botany can go beyond planting and into this idea of like the future. What would happen, if we lost all pollinating insects and only mosses and ferns started to thrive? There'd be no flowering plants. What would that look like? So this is some work I was doing at a residency in the Finnish Arctic. Would mosses and ferns start to get like gigantic again, like they did back in the geologic time? And would there be shopping? So a lot's being lost with our current trajectory of climate change and capitalist metabolism, but some organisms more tolerant of our disturbance are actually thriving. The question is, will we? And that's it. Yeah, let me stop sharing here.
Thank you. Will we? Let's keep this question.
There we go.
As we listen, thank you. As we listen to Ron. Ron, let me introduce you before you start. Ron Finley was a successful fashion designer before he became known as Gangster Gardener, a rebel with a green thumb. In 2010, Ron decided to plant some vegetables in his South Central Los Angeles Parkway, that often neglected space between sidewalk and street. Soon after, he was cited for gardening without a permit by the apparent owners of those dirt patches, the city of Los Angeles. This was the beginning of a horticultural revolution. Ron fought back and won. He started a petition with fellow green activists and demanded the right to garden and grow food in his neighborhood. With the help of council member Herb Wesson, the law prohibiting production of produce gardens on Los Angeles city parkways was changed. In 2012, he was inspired to launch the Ron Finley Project, a nonprofit organization that focuses on turning urban food deserts into food forests by planting community gardens. Since then, Finley, who grew up in the South Central Los Angeles food desert and knows what it is like to drive 45 minutes to get a fresh tomato, has helped plant dozens of community gardens on empty lots around Los Angeles. Finley has appeared in several documentaries about urban farming, including Urban Fruit and Can You Dig This? Welcome, Ron.
Welcome, thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me share my screen here.
Thanks.
Doesn't feel like it. One second, it's not loading. It's not sharing. Here we go.
Yeah, it was perfect.
Bam.
Thank you.
How you guys doing this afternoon? So how I started was I wanted to have no, not the slides not changing. A lot of what you said is in here, but how I started was I just wanted to walk outside my home and be assaulted by beauty, assaulted by nature. I wanted hummingbirds, flying on my shoulders and butterflies laying on my head, and and I just wanted to look out at beauty, and I didn't have that. So I figured if there's not beauty there, you should put it there yourself. And one of the other things was, how do we get Black folks back to this thing that they used to work in, which they call dirt, which we know as soil. And that was my objective. How do we make gardening sexy? This is where I started. You could see how my beautiful grass, which basically is Bermuda Bermuda grass, I used to pay somebody to mow it, and then I used to mow it myself. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I mowing these weeds? And so you see on the other side of the screen, one of the first things that we did, I just took out all the Bermuda grass through sheet mulching. I took it out at first. Then when we start doing other people's, we started sheet mulching it. So this is what it looked like a few years ago. I used a lot of sunflowers for soil remediation, but also for beauty, because people can't look at a sunflower without smiling. And it's just something, even when you look at you, Andrea, when you even, if people hear the name sunflower, it just makes them smile. And so putting this garden here, it's basically made me like an urban sociologist, an urban anthropologist. I'm probably the only one on here not associated with a with a university. I had to figure this all out by myself. So what I did, you can see the sunflowers in the background. That's a container on the side, on this side of the property, where we had things growing up on top of the container. So the banana trees, we had, all kinds of greens, from the collards to Kell to, all like maybe 5 different kinds of spinach. And a lot of people, you can't plant bananas in South Central. And I'm okay, there they are right there. So this is where I'm sitting right now. This property was it was a swim school before I got here, with this 50-foot pool, 50 by 25. So everybody's, oh, just fill it with soil, fill it with soil. I'm like, no. So what I started using it for was water catchment. I had stump pumps that I would put in when it rained, and then I had barrels, the blue barrels, and I would pump the water out of the pool into the barrels, and then I would use the water accordingly to water my plants. But what I'm really big on is things having, afterlife, after they're supposed to do what they supposedly were designed for. Like you can see the wagon there that has succulents in it, or you can see the shopping cart, which they're around, which I make these into gardens. And what we did at one point, we had a pizza garden in a shopping cart, and then we had like a Mexican food garden in a shopping cart. And my thing with that was, if you have a balcony and the sun only comes, moves during the day, if you're in an apartment building, I thought these were perfect because you can literally move them towards the sun. I don't believe in throwing away anything. This is what it looks like now. Crazy. Like you said, my Eduardo, my jungle. But I and what, Oliver, something you said about, native plants. I've been getting that, people say, oh, plant natives. And I always ask my native when the dinosaurs were here, when it was water here, how do you determine when the cowboys were here? And they don't have an answer for that, so is it a date, a frame? So I'm like, no, it's what's native. So that I like to hearing you say that, because I don't hear anybody question the whole native people about that situation. So this shows you what it looks like. I said, what it looks like now. And like the thing with the chickens on it, where it says operate from happy, that's a theme around here. I believe that we all should operate from happy. Happy should be a class that is taught in elementary school throughout college, you know, because people act like you can just get to happy and it's just there, and it's not. What about if you never seen happy? The same, what about if you never tasted it? What about if you never smelled? The same thing with beauty. This was about putting beauty in a place that wasn't there. You know, and my thing is, if you put beauty in, you get beauty out. So beauty in, beauty out. And that's a lot of my philosophy. This on the, I guess to me, on the left side of my screen is a big tree there. And that's a nectarine that I didn't plant. I think it was a seed from another tree that was in the back was there. And all of a sudden, you know, a year later, I have this tree that the fruits coming from it is incredible. It's on top of concrete, 18 inches of soil, and I have this massive tree. So nature wants to happen. You know, all we have to do is guide it to where we want it. The other tree that's in the foreground is you can see the figs on the tree on the right side of the screen, and that's again, birds planted that one, I'm pretty sure. The whole model with me is, how do we make things custom for us instead of this whole built out environment that we're supposed to live in a box? And I tell people, there ain't no fucking box. You know, let's just think. I'm not thinking outside the box. Let's just think, because I compare it to a plant being in a pot where it has, the roots are still gonna grow. So if you don't let those roots grow, they're gonna wind up suffocating that plant and choking that plant. And so let's just think, instead of already setting up boxes for people to live outside of, you know. So each one of my projects is different, it's site specific, but there's some things that I like putting in to places where they can go. And that's papyrus, one thing, because it represents Africa to me, and it's beautiful. And, you know, it goes all the way back to the scrolls. That's what they made the scrolls out of. So like with Oliver, these lots are everywhere, you know, vacant, trash, and these could be beautiful centers of learning, beautiful centers of inspiration. And I mean, literally, this is what we can have the kids go to after school or during school. My whole thing too with the school situation is the school should be in the garden, not the garden at the school. I mean, these kids shouldn't be locked up in these schools all day and get 10 minutes, 12 minutes for recess to go outside. Let's keep them outside where they're gonna benefit from it. That lot can be turned into this, where we inspire and we feed communities. And that's what this is about, you know, is having kids show them the value in themselves. You know, that's what this is about, because we're pledge allegiance to something silly instead of pledge allegiance to this earth, pledge allegiance to yourself, pledge allegiance to humanity. We don't teach them that. We teach them that things give them value, you know, and they don't. The only thing that can give you value is you and your character. This is what I want kids to see every day. You know, the beauty that is nature. You know, most people have never seen an artichoke blossom, which is like a sea anemone. It's just, it feels like rubber too. It's just beautiful. And this is what I want to expose children to. So these things are on the parkway, because I get to see how people interact. And some people have a problem interacting with beauty because it makes them feel uncomfortable. You know, so we've had 14-foot sunflower, and the first thing somebody could do, they can think, is just to destroy it and break it and pull it down the street. This is every day in my garden. This is what I get to see. So I'm, like I said, if you plant beauty there, you'll get beauty out of it. And this is what it's about right here, is these kids, you know, exposing them to what they are. We are nature, and they should know that from day one. It's not you and nature. You don't go, you're nature. Look in the mirror and you will see nature every day. You know, so we separate everything, you know, and we shouldn't. We should bring them into the soil so they can see the alchemy, the magic, the transformative powers that this ball we're spinning around in outer space looking for aliens. You know, we're aliens. So this is what I do. This is a talk I did with Perkins and Wills, where we, in my right here where we're sitting now, Perkins and Will is a big architect firm that they just, one of the things they're really famous for is they built the African American Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. So, okay, I think that's it.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Merlin, let me introduce you as you set up your screen. Merlin Loco is an architectural scientist, designer, and educator from Ghana and the Philippines, whose work centers on the upcycling of agricultural waste and biopolymer materials. Loco holds a PhD from the Center for Architecture, Science and Ecology, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Her research integrates a broad range of technical, environmental, social, and cultural criteria to question contemporary material value systems and upcycling infrastructures to meet generative justice goals. Loco is currently teaching at the Cooper Union and previously taught at Rensselaer Schools of Architecture, where she served as director for the Building Sciences program. In January 2022, Loco will join Yale School of Architecture as an assistant professor. She's the founder of Willow Technologies, based in Accra, Ghana, focused on the development of integrated material lifecycle design within the food, agriculture, and building sector. Her work was nominated for the Visible Awards in 2019, the Royal Academy Dorfman Awards, and she was a finalist for the Hublot Design Prize in, again, 2019. Loco's recent projects have been exhibited at Z33 House of Contemporary Art, Design, and Architecture, at the Sonsbeek 2024 Biennale in the Netherlands, Triennale Milano, 4th Istanbul Design Biennale, and at the Royal Institute of British Architects North as part of Liverpool exhibition in 2018. Welcome, Merlin Loco. I think you're muted.
Of course I am. Sorry.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, Ron and Oliver, for those really exciting presentations. They're incredibly inspiring. I'm sort of in between continents and roles. And over the past 6 months, I've been an artist in residency with a mentor of mine, the Ghanaian artist, Ella Natsui, as well as teaching a course that's at the intersection of agriculture, food, and architecture at Cooper Union. And in these past 6 months, in preparing for this talk, I realized that for the last decade, I've been working with materials, plant materials in their afterlife. And it is only now that I'm actually dealing with them, as living organisms in one's hands. And it is not easy. So huge inspiration to see those former presentations. And so, this journey kind of began in 2011, formally, by looking at a flagship post-agricultural waste product in the form of coconut husk, which is a byproduct of a multi-billion-dollar food and cosmetic industry. And that is generated primarily along the coastlines of tropical countries. The scale of this byproduct was sort of a mere drop in the global surplus of plant monoculture practices that have been intimately tied to our growth as a species. The more we grow, the more food we need, and the more waste we generate, particularly from agriculture. We know that 6 years ago, we were producing well over in excess of 1 billion tons of plant material, with only a third ending up on our food plate. A large percentage is actually prematurely downcycled or combusted in open air around the world. So arguably, this is one of the world's most underutilized material resources, and these are already in the hands of producers that often don't see the value returned to them. So I just wanted to share very briefly 3 friends, 3 plants. And these have sort of happened in West Africa, where I am, in parts of Europe, and in the States, in upstate New York. The first is, the coconut. When one sort of, thinks about the ecological context that gives rise to the coconut tree, it is easily one of the most formidable trees on the planet. It has to deal with sandy conditions, a salty subterranean terroir, harsh winds, salty water, high humidity, high solar radiation, and it is constantly adapting every day through its architecture. Its roots are not deep at all, very thin. It creates a very interesting and efficient fibrous system to maintain quite a resilient tree and its crops. So this is very much the beginning of the tree, and it begins with the coconut seedling protected by the husk, which is the material I'm most familiar with. And from the very beginning of its life, if you think about the material performance that the husk is asked to do, it's supposed to insulate this embryonic, delicious coconut water and coconut meat. So it has to perform all of these thermal, hygroscopic, and cooling mechanisms in order to do this. And this performance is something that can show up in its life as a building material if we consider the ways we actually transform it. So while coconut husk is not the most widely available agricultural waste product, it falls far behind wheat, rice, and corn, the flagship cash crops of the 20th century. It is quite unique in what it has within its material composition. And that is a relatively high percentage of the structural binders, lignin, and a relatively low percentage of sugar, the cellulosic material, which has meant that it has been applied for a range of mechanical applications, from insulation all the way to roofing sheets. What was incredible about breaking down the husk for us was discovering that a majority of the husk is composed of this dust-like substance called pith, which is often used in hydroponic or soil substitute media applications. But also when it is pressed at relatively low temperatures and pressures, it forms the most uniform, robust matrix in terms of an adhesive. So within the husk, you have the adhesive. And so essentially you produce a binderless fiberboard. We also realized across these two components, the fiber and the pith, that there was sort of a sliding scale of transformation pathways, ranging from the mechanical to the sorptive, and that have many applications, from cleaning our water, our air, growing, as well as performing as a building material. We've done a lot of research in terms of trying to isolate and determine which parameters around the processing, the production, the pressing of these materials generate different performances in the board. And in that process, we also began to compare coconut pith with other bioadhesives. This is actually a failure. We realized that no coconut is ever created equal. So if you get coconut from Ghana relative to Sri Lanka or India, you're never going to get the same board. And so we began to actually look at bio binders in upstate New York, like mycelium and soy proteins. This is sort of, the type of experiments we do to investigate how to press these boards into biocomposites, sort of like a Kit Kat sandwich, and using a collaboration of agricultural byproducts from jute, soy, corn-fed mycelium, coconut husk soy, to actually locate and spatialize materials where they perform best in a building material. We also are very keen to introduce and co-develop these materials in countries where these wastes are produced. And so installing this in a contemporary art festival in Ghana was probably the biggest goal, because building with these materials there's huge negative social perception and barrier to taking things that are made of sort of low-tech, fibers. And this is caught up within a much larger material paradigm that also relates to thermal comfort and durability. So, trying to expand our understanding about how to create value, instead of downcycling, there might be other ways through design to improve the value proposition of many of these wastes. And there's also a question of life cycle timing, of when these materials can move on to another life and ultimately return to the soil. The second material, hemp, is sort of a material that has a ton of cellulose. So it's the antithesis, opposite of the coconut. And it is primarily, we've developed a method with a collaborator, Ecovative Mushroom Company in upstate New York, for prototyping these materials with a lot of control around their forms, sort of a process of milling that we're very familiar with, vacuum forming, to develop these grow trays where the hemp inoculated with the liquid mycelium are fit into, including scrap wood for fastening them to building assemblies. And over the course of 5 days, you see the mycelium digest all the cellulosic material within that tray, and eventually grow into this form, which is sort of a low density insulation acoustical panel. This is sort of it installed in a exhibition titled Healing Meadow, looking at what happens to sites after extraction and processes of healing. What's interesting across these work was, these lines of research was trying to understand how composition, knowing the materials in their afterlife, might inform a range of transformation pathways. So this sort of ratio of lignin to cellulose is quite instructive in terms of what materials can be processed with low energy and non-toxic methods. Mycelium has also been a fantastic material for trying to prototype distributed modes of production. Unlike the way we produce materials, which we take all our supply chain, pump it into a centralized factory, we have high methods of controlling production. I'm keen to sort of work with community scale urban farms to develop these grow it yourself kits and grow materials right on site. And so this project in Liverpool with Squash Nutrition and Reba was important for developing these human scale kits that over 200 participants sort of participated in, from kindergarten all the way to elderly folks who are working in urban community farms. And this was all grown in Reba's gallery, where we assembled a grow chamber, a recycled asbestos container actually, and allowed the mycelium bricks to grow, and were installed right at the tunnel at the end of at the entrance of the gallery itself. We've also expanded this sort of lignocellulosic inventory to look at other types of biomass sources. In France, working with the Luma Foundation, we've looked at byproducts from food and invasive species. And we've tried to understand also the resultant transformation and material performance of these different types of biomass sources, mechanically primarily. And the last project is very much ongoing, but it's probably the most difficult one. It's in collaboration with a chef, one of Africa's leading culinary practitioners, Selassie Atadika. And we've been visiting farms all across the country that have been primarily leading and preserving soil restoration practices, ways of returning nutrients to the soil. In this sort of process, this journey that we've been on for the past few months, we were actually shocked to find out that the one carbohydrate cash crop that is consumed in the country the most, there was only one commercial enterprise still producing something that was considered from an ancient African grain. And so that's the Orzga glaberrima African rice. Most of the rice on the African continent is imported from Asia. And so there's sort of two parallel projects which involve the planting of African indigenous seeds, these ancient grains, and developing a rotating research platform for propagating the seeds and education to a much wider public. So we obtained about 119 ascensions of these ancient grains. These are African seeds from the Svalbard Global Seed Vault a few months ago through Africa Rice Basin, Ivory Coast. And these are being grown individually in order to generate at least 150 to 200 seeds per species, ascension, sorry, in order to actually distribute this to cooperatives that are growing rice, because access to the seed is a huge problem. In parallel to that, we're in the city of Accra, there's only one large green public space, the last remaining park. And it has been at the corner of it a huge flood problem seasonally during the rainy season. And so we decided to actually use the problem of water to supply the growth and support the growth of these rice seeds. Because it's a public site, we were working with a very complex group of stakeholders, including people on the move, street children who are actually probably the most knowledgeable about flood patterns in the city, as well as a whole group of laborers in the city, from masons to soil diggers, who are all farmers essentially. And so their knowledge in coming together to develop a public rotating bed for indigenous crops is something that's very much ongoing. And so there's sort of 10 beds in sort of 4 rings, as you can see over here, which is in the flooded corner of the park. This was launched in August through a public build. The MP for the district actually planted the first rice seeds. Many people have never seen the rice crop, very similar to what Ron described, and people understanding the life cycle of crops, again, are incredibly important. Also, the integration of sister crops that grow very well with rice, as well as crops whose waste are actually used in a layered system of mulching, is something that we're also studying. And so this is at a couple of months ago. And it's completely uncontrolled. We thought we were pretty controlled, but there's a lot of stuff growing in there that we're also documenting. And so this is sort of the state of the rice as of a couple of weeks ago. So with that, I'll end there and look forward to engaging in the conversation.
Thank you, Marlene. Thanks a lot. Okay, Roth. Roth is a self-taught architect, environmentalist, philanthropist, and entrepreneur born in Argentina and residing in Mexico. He is the founder and CEO of the Azulik Eco Resorts, the architectural firm Roth Architecture, and the Enchanting Transformation Foundation, an initiative for the care of children, forests, animals, and native communities. In recent years, Roth has gained notoriety in the world of art and architecture for projects that rely on construction techniques used by native communities and avoid the use of heavy machinery to respect ecosystem dynamics and natural topography. Roth seeks to preserve the environment in every creative journey. In all his projects, natural elements, trees, water, soil, and morphology remain intact. The 200 trees originally found on his property continue to thrive inside his house, as they do in both his museums. His architecture is often perceived as inhabitable sculpture. He generally builds intuitively without pre-established plans or sketches. Roth has been actively contributing to the artistic and cultural scene in Latin America. In 2017, he designed and built 2 contemporary art museums named Spheric. In 2019, Time magazine listed the museum as one of the 100 greatest places in the world to visit. The Spheric has also won the 2020 Leading Cultural Destination Berlin Award for the New Culture Destination of the Year in Latin America. Welcome, Roth. I think you're muted.
¿Puedes sacar el mute?
Fantastic, yeah.
It's okay? Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Well, first of all, I am fascinated with the panelists before me. I want to invite Mylene to come and visit us because we have a lot of synergies what she is doing, and we are planning to do we are planning now a factory in the middle of the jungle without cutting any tree for the building. It's a prefabric organic fabric, and we are working in acoustic also. And so all the materials she's designing, I think we have a lot of synergy with our research and development department, and it will be a great pleasure for us if we have the opportunity to receive my link and collaborate in projects of many different projects. The thing we can also in Amazonia also with our projects of farming there, and in more commercial aspect with the development of the panel, isolations panel and everything. I'm fascinated. And to Ron, I want to say, Ron, that I invited him a year ago to come to stay with us, but now I want to warn him that if he come, we won't let him go because what he does is amazing, and I love everything that he works. And I love when he say that beauty in and beauty out. It looks, sounds like the Salagi salutation, no? Beauty inside, outside, to the left, to the right, and top and down, and in front and everywhere. And other thing that I love you do is how you work with kids in the communities and how you empower them. I will let you know that yesterday I take a guy who is the pool guy and give them the opportunity. He barely speaks Spanish. He's Maya, and
Wow.
I invite him because he'll see me once passing by, and he make a draw of me, and he's so good the draw that he invite him to participate in our design team. And now today he's a designer in the team. And some time ago, in the middle of the in the lockdown, I have another pool boy. It's a good place to find guys, the pool, because I found another one that I am, the architects were out because of the pandemic. And so I said, this guy, you will be the chief of the models department. And he doesn't know what models means, but he become a very good modelist. And other two masons that are working in the building, one day comes and ask me, say me they want to be architects, but they have any training, me neither, in architecture. So I think, well, perhaps they deserve the opportunity. And now the team of architects that they are working with asked me for a rise of the salary of these two guys, because they are doing a very interesting work. So don't come, Ron, because we won't let you go.
We're starting to forge new collaborations.
I was trying to come.
Yeah.
You guys
Let's
kept having.
Continue.
You guys kept having storms.
Yes. Well, the invitation is open, and and I want to thank you to Alexandra also, because Alexandra, when she started the presentation, she talked about the sun, and I think that everything start and finish with the sun. That everything that we see is frozen light from the sun. The sun pass by a plant and produce the oxygen, produce the carbon, produce everything we see is made out of sun. And we forget the sun, we forget the plant, we forget the oxygen, the water, we forget life. And then our thought forms, or the way we process in all the human activities, particularly in architecture, is easy to explain it, is from function to form. So if we need to make a restroom, we say, well, what we would put in the restroom? What is the function of the restroom? Where we need a WC, a tube, and then we make a square, put the things inside, and we start living in square spaces. And these patterns of square patterns that we reproduce in our cars, in our schools, in the public buildings, everything is a square. Nature is not a square. So the thought form of nature are open and full of life, but our patterns are full of sorrow and pain. In the nature, there is not overpopulation, there is not climate change, there is not COVID. The nature is fluent and is constantly growing and creating more form of life with this thought form of freedom that we don't have in our houses. So when we come to Umay, we decide that instead of destroy the jungle and flat the land and make another horrible building, we will try to incorporate ourselves to the total symbiosis of the place. So we don't cut any vegetal form with more than 1 inch of diameter. We don't cut anything. And we start looking, which is the best place to start building. And so we pay attention to the full symbiosis. We pay attention of the bird that is singing in some place. We look at this place because we were in the middle of the forest looking for places to start building a place to cohabit, to live with the nature, and at the same time elevate the experience of the nature. And finally, in my residence there, I have 200 trees inside the house, 30 trees in my bedroom. But it's not that the trees are in my bedroom, it's that I am living with an ecosystem, a wise ecosystem that is smart. So if I pass by a plant, the plant reads me chemically and understand what is my state of humor. And sometimes if I don't know an answer for something, I question nature, I question the trees. Of course, they don't have a mouth, they don't answer me with words. But there are a lot of things, the signs that act around all the full symbiosis and transmit the information. I will give you example of that because in Patagonia, our neighbors are a group of people that 100 years ago they were Mapuches, but they were completely acculturated, so they forget completely their traditions. So 8 years ago, they feel that if they become a tribe again, they can get some leverage to matters of ecology and protection of their lands. So they call a shaman. I am in deep touch with them. And as long as when I was a child, I lived very near a Mapuche community. I know the rituals. And so I told them, you will start dreaming who will be the chief. The chief will dream first. And if he don't tell the dreams, the other will dream that he will be. And so they laugh at me because what this guy knows about us. But this is exactly what started happening. So they happen. So they start sharing with me their dreams. So months or few years after that, they say me, today you will receive a visit. And I say, how do you know? I invite anybody who are in the middle of Patagonia, in the middle of the Andes, and it's very hard to come here, and there's no way that somebody comes without announcement. And they say, but somebody will come to visit you today. How do you know? Because the chucao sings well. The chucao is a bird. So I start paying attention with them because they start remembering all the phylogenetic information of the tribe that for 100 years they had forgotten. But now they are remembering. They start talking the Mapudundum, that is the language, the kids speak that language, and are all aware of all the full symbiosis. In Amazonia, I spent a year learning with shamans there, and now we have a place and we send some voluntary people there to reforesting and farming vegetable, fruit, medicinal plants that they will share with the local communities, and the communities teach them how to hunt with an arc and harrow. And living in the jungle is a challenge. There are people from city people, and one day they write me, we can't take a bath where we usually do because an anaconda 25 centimeters diameter is moving there. So when they got in the jungle, they make an offering with tobacco, they prepare because there are dangers there. But at the same time, there are a lot of opportunities to learn from sacred plants, to learn about a lot of level of wisdom that happen in the jungle that transform these people in amazing ways. So here we are living in the jungle in Umay, and the artisans had the workshops in the middle of the jungle. And when they work, instead of working as we do in our culture, from function to form, they work as in a natural way, as the nature work, that is from form to function. So instead of when they are working with a mood, I went to make a cup to have coffee in. They don't work this way. They play with the mood, and some forms born. It's like they are midwife. They are keeping alive a form. And when the form is growing, they start analyzing the form and say, oh, what is this nice form? It can be a dish, can be perhaps to put flower in. So the forms determine the function. This is the way that the nature works, sometimes across thousands of years. The land becoming like a pound, the water is accumulating there. So when we start building our museum here in Umay, there was water because it was a rainy season, and in certain parts of where we decided to build, there was water there. So we let the water in exactly the same place, and we built the form of the floor with exactly maintaining the form that the original form of the place. So when the visitors get in, they have to take out their shoes. And when the feet are out of the cave, because we fabricate also a cave for the shoes, because we live in a cave conceptually and physically, and we transport in caves, and we have caves for the shoes. So when we take these caves out, the toes start feeling. They feeling the difference between touching the concrete, touching the vines, and so they start becoming aware of all the symbiosis that's happening inside the museum, because there are a lot of living beings living in the museum, even fire and water. So the experience of these people is an experience of reconnection, and it's an experience of remembering. So I feel that through nature, I remember, and I change completely my art. I change completely my spiritual life. I change completely my perception of life. And this happens to all of us. All the people who is working here in Umay, we are learning for nature, because this is the process that going from the form to the to the, how do you say? I forget the word. Instead of going for the
function, form to
function.
Function. Instead of going from function to form, going from form to function, make us design the doors, the windows, the roofs, everything, the buildings, because we don't have any plan for all the buildings we do for ourselves. We don't draw anything before. We don't have a previous plan. We meet in the place with the masons and everybody, and they ask, what we will do? And I say, I have no idea. So everybody laughed. And I say, well, it's a good way to start doing something beautiful, because everybody is happy. Let's listen what the nature wants us to do in harmony with everything, without cutting anything. So the experience is an experience of integrated ourselves with this thought form of nature. So for me, this is my experience, is the experience of my tribe, and is the experience to remember, to be part of the full semiosis of things. And this start, as Alexandra says, with the sun, start with the plants, start with the water. We now are designing a sanctuary of water, and also a museum of water, and all our companies are focused in process of liberating water for all beings, or clean waters, and working, and wherever we work, our principal focus is the water. So I love you, pool, Ron. I love the idea, and well, that's it, what we do here in the jungle.
Thank you, Roth.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, mind-blowing. Thank you. Last but definitely not least, Sanford Quinter. Sanford is a philosopher, writer, and editor. Equipped with a distinctive transdisciplinary approach that draws from science, techniques, and the arts, he has written on design, technology, and nature, and helped direct generations of designers in their creative exploration of cognition, subjectivity, cultures, and environments to expand the concept of design as a transformative act integral to the dynamics of life. He is currently Professor of Science and Design at the Pratt Institute in New York. He has previously taught at MIT, Harvard Graduate School of Design, Columbia, and Rice Universities, as well as the Architectural Association in London and the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. He holds a doctorate in comparative literature from Columbia University. Quinter was co-founder and longtime editor of Zone Books and the influential journal Zone. He was also a participant in the series of cross-cultural conferences on the condition of architecture at the end of the millennium, convened by Architecture New York and E Corporation throughout the 90s. He's the author of over 150 articles and essays. His books include Architectures of Time, Towards a Theory of the Event in Modernist Culture, Far from Equilibrium, Essays on Technology and Design Culture, and Requiem for the City at the End of the Millennium. His many collaborative projects include Mutations with Rem Koolhaas and Stefano Boeri, the forthcoming What is Energy and How Else We Might Think About It with Kyle Moe, and a recent series of the journal Log that implores designers to refound their relationship with nature. Welcome, Sanford. I think you're muted.
Thank you very much. Well, before I start, I'm going to have to ask for a bit of assistance. How do I share screen, and should I put my, I've never done this before, honestly. I've never shared my own screen.
Okay, at the bottom of your screen, there's
Wait, I want to
screen.
ask first, should I set up my PowerPoint as if I were presenting it, you know, as a projection? Should I put it on that? And then would I not see anything?
I think first of all, we share the screen and then we'll change it to.
All right.
So at the bottom, there's share screen.
Oh boy, now what? Oh no.
Can you see it?
No, I got problems, I'm afraid. Jesus.
Could you possibly send it to Alex?
Or to me, and I will flip through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, let me do that. Gosh, I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm gonna have to save it. Oops. I'm going to suggest everybody take a bit of a 3-minute break while I do this.
We've all been there, Sanford. It's not a problem.
No, but
Trust me.
there are so many anomalies with this damn computer. So today, I even had considerable difficulty even getting on Zoom. Okay.
Okay, we're officially taking a micro break. I think Sanford is trying to figure out his screen.
I just have to, okay, gotcha, just a moment. No, I'm going to email it to you, is that right?
Okay. I guess in the meantime, Roth and Merlin and Roth and Oliver can plan the first collaboration.
I love it.
Hey, don't leave me out, you guys. Okay,
We
Alex.
might have to leave you out, Sanford.
Okay, man, that's it. Alexander, just confirm to me that you received an email.
Still waiting for it.
Okay. you know, the horror really of Zoom is that it commandeers the entire attention.
I got it.
Oh, you got it. Okay, good.
Yes.
So,
Give me 1 second. Okay, I've got it.
can I just give you a signal to change the screen? I mean,
You will absolutely. I am going to share it in 1 second. Yes. Okay. Here it is.
Yay.
Yeah.
all right. Thanks for rooting there, man. Thanks, Ron.
Well, Sanford, I have my assistant right here for a reason. Okay, so no, don't feel bad.
Well, I'm glad to have you on my side, Ron.
Okay. Just tell me
listen.
when to click.
Yeah. Let's just look at this for a while. I mean, let's face it. I got up early this morning to make this thing, and I would like to first say how absolutely humbled I am to be in this company, how embarrassed I am in a way at the flat-footedness of what I am intending to present. I am sort of the philosopher, but I guess I appear a little bit as the flatfoot, as the egghead, because of the presentation that I've decided to put together, because I couldn't figure out exactly how to make my point, which always escapes me because it's simultaneously got too much detail and also just too large, and because it's uncertain, which is why I have a nice question mark. Do you need me? Do you want me? No. Are we?
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
That's
I mean,
perfect.
yeah, Zoom keeps asking me questions. I was going to try to ignore it, but yeah, I've got a thesis I'd like to present. Anyway, the thing is I thought when this conference was first introduced, this is going back a year or so, that it would be a mandate. Well, we thought we'd be there in person, and I expected that we would be delivering papers. And I always kept it in the back of my head that I would do a paper, but really, due to all kinds of reasons, I really only discovered very, very recently that we were really going to be having a conversation, and that the presentations would be on about 10 minutes. So listen, let me not waste any more time, but context is kind of important for what I want to present here. Like many, I would say I became enchanted by the explosion of interest in the recent discoveries around plant world. All kinds of things that were, represented in all those wonderful, relatively recent books, such as those by Wohlleben on the, whatever it was, the Secret Life of Plants, or whatever that was called. It was a wonderful book. Susan Simard's discoveries and the subsequent publication of her book, Richard Powers, and so on and so forth. So I asked this question, in a way, as a philosopher, because, and I should state it up front, since I'm really not uncertain as how much of this, even of this rudimentary, what I thought summary presentation I'm going to get through, is really what I'm interested in ultimately is asking the question as to, we know, for example, that the problem of even human consciousness is today being interrogated and challenged on a whole variety of fronts, not least of which is the existence and discovery of molecules found in the plant world and their ways of engaging and transforming those aspects, and also of revealing to humans exactly what is the nature and the unexpected nature, for example, of their forms of sentience and awareness. I think many people understand roughly what I'm referring to, but I want to get into it in as general a way as possible, because the question I want to ask is whether or not what we are now discovering about the plant universe is not actually, in fact, best understood if we understand it as part of our own biology and our own universe. So let's go to a next slide and remind me what I've got. Oh, yes. So this idea of intelligence in the history of philosophy, it actually goes back to the very beginnings of our tradition, the Greeks, these pre-Socratics, particularly, let's say, Heraclitus. But the pre-Socratics talked about what is intelligence. Intelligence is like a combination of two things. Physis, which is essentially the dynamo that underlies the nature of things, the thing that constantly promotes, engenders growth and differentiation, transformation, and elaboration. That term physis eventually became in Latin the term natura, and actually now is what that is the root of what we call nature and even the universe. Logos comes from Heraclitus, and the phrase I quote of his to give us an understanding of just how important that idea was as the root and source understanding of the world around us. He says, to know the logos by which all things are steered through all things. And this idea that all things are steered through all things is one of the most ancient thoughts that we have, but it's also the foundation, generally speaking, of our ideas about nature. Please flip. I want to go quickly here. Yeah, it's often said, or it's sometimes said, that plants evolved chemistry to effectuate their universe, their social universe, and humans invented language. My question is, are these really different things? Are these really different? The sessile versus the motile, which is to say the idea, of course, that plants are in fact sessile in the sense that they do not move, versus those beings, those forms of life which have the capacity to move. Is that really, in fact, is that really a hard distinction? Is that something that is not actually a continuum as well? And I invoke this idea of torpor, which is from Bergson, who basically described plants as having a limited capacity for sentience, and a limited, because they have a limited, shall we say, because they have a greater amount of torpor. But what he identified in plants was, at that time, of course, before we knew very much, was their inability is the low quantum, shall we say, of free will that they had, whereas the forms of life that had less torpor, those who could move, those who had this energetic, constant, transformative, visible. Anyway, the point is we're looking at a continuum, and maybe we're thinking about this all wrong, especially in light of contemporary discoveries. Please go to the next slide. Now, what I decided to do was to put together, because I thought this would be one way of presenting the holistic idea and understanding that I am trying to get to, if you like, in my own work. So I decided I was going to go to my own private library and pull out the books that are my favorite books, where I feel like I learned things about plants. The first one is simply this wonderful book of Goethe, who may be the first person who began to think about plants as a problem, as a scientific problem, or as a problem that could yield, if you like, fundamental knowledge. Anyway, so there's Goethe. The work, I think, is more or less 1790, followed by this masterpiece, which is the founding work on the problem of plants and its relationship to its relationship to the entire earth, but also its relationship to all of the life and all of especially the cultures on earth. I'll get to more to that. Please go to the next slide. These are books that had great impact on me, and I want to just explain what it was. The first one, because there are some wonderful essays, the one on the Bushmen, the Zhuhuanxi, which is the way we refer to their culture now. There is a wonderful few essays in there on what is often referred to as Stone Age science, and that is the unbelievably deep understanding that Stone Age cultures have of their plant universe. On the right is a wonderful book by Wolfgang Schivelbusch, who is from the history, he comes from the school, or he identifies with the school of what is known as the Histoire des Mentalités. But what I want to say most importantly now, just as an introduction to this idea, is what he shows is things, it's a social history, shall we say, a social history of plants, which includes, of course, the unbelievable impact that it has had on the organization of human culture. But I want to say this concept of mentality, the concept of even, human mentation, human experience, human sentience in relation to plants, I think is an area of that is just about to explode, and for obvious reasons, not the least of which has to do with the discovery a few decades ago of what is known as the endocannabinoid system, for example, in humans, which is now, according, for example, to an article published in one of Harvard's publications just 3 months ago, is now widely seen. The endocannabinoid system. I want to say that what that means is the cannabinoid system inside of our bodies, which is to say there is a system of, let's just say, reception and distribution in our nervous systems, which is based on cannabinoid receptors. And everybody recognizes the cannabinoid root as actually representing, up until relatively recently, representing something that you find outside in the world. If you find them in, of course, you find them in the forests, or you find them in, well, the growers' places. Next, please. Plants of the Gods in One River. I'm going to keep this quite short. I refer here primarily to Richard Schultes, who is considered to be the founder of modern ethnobotany. And I think those two terms put together are very important. Ethnobotany, ethnic, that's to say human cultures, and the botanical world. He was profoundly interested in cultural and plant interactions. And he remains the great inspirer, shall we say, of the generations that came after him, but also the discoverer of the book on the left. The book on the right is by Wade Davis, one of his incredible students. Wade Davis did this extraordinary work about 30 years ago, where Schultes at Harvard, Schultes ran the ethnobotany department, which after Schultes' death was closed. Simply, there was nobody else to really take it on. I don't know why Harvard doesn't support it. Maybe it'll start somewhere else. As far as I know, there are no specifically ethnobotanical departments any longer. But Wade Davis's early work was on the ethnobotany of zombieism. Nobody believed in zombies. Schultes knew that zombieism was real. He sent them down to Haiti, and they unlocked the plant basis of the zombie, shall we say, cultural phenomenon. Please go to next. I'm running here, but I got to run fast. Now, Andrew Wiles' The Natural Mind is actually a remarkable book on what he refers to as the human nervous system in a putative, shall we say, natural state. And natural doesn't mean untouched. It simply means, what is the nervous system as an evolved entity? And he puts it continuously in relation, if you like, to the ways in which it can be inflected, and it has been inflected, if you like, by engagement with the plant world. Now, the very famous book by the very famous writer, Michael Pollan, is, I just want to signal, almost everybody has read a book of Michael Pollan, including his, I think, not nearly as good recent book on how to change your mind. But I would recommend, if for nothing else, the essay on cannabis in The Botany of Desire is, in my mind, one of the best things he's ever written. And it's a very important speculation, if you like, on the handshake between the cannabinoid molecules which exist outside in the world and the receptors, the CB1, CB2 receptors in the human brain, and the way in which they transform awareness, especially with respect to what he would consider a survival. I don't subscribe to this thesis. I think it's very, I don't think it's very interesting. I think that the problem gets much more interesting much later, but he thinks it has a lot to do with cultivating and offering us a capacity for forgetting, which he says, and this is the interesting part of it, He says that when humans can achieve a state of mind or a body state in which they can forget certain stimulus, it allows them to reconnect with another level of stimulus. Now, by the way, I'm interpreting greatly here, another level of stimulus, which has to do with our capacity to engage and actually to feel and sense matter at another level. Okay, let's keep going. These are two, I'm going to try and skip a little bit, but this book, Mycelium Running, everybody's talking about mycorrhizae these days. Everybody's very, very interested in the foundational transformation that's taken place in how we understand the social, specifically the social life of plants. We now know that plants don't exist in their isolation, even when they are isolated, but rather they are they belong to these incredibly intense and almost uniquely, not completely uniquely, because there's a great deal of chemical communication taking place above ground, but what takes place underground and the way in which they form these handshakes with, of course, with the mycelium has changed our understanding, if you like, of what a plant is. You know, some people who were in botany, they say we don't like the word forests because it seems to. Anyway, I'd like the word jungle. I think Ron mentioned jungle, or he mentioned that somebody had referred to his jungle. I think jungle is it's a word waiting to be reintroduced, you know, post-Tarzan, etc. On Deep History and Brain, I'm going to skip over this, but it's an extraordinary work by a historian who sees psychotropy and he sees the entire history of culture as being about the techniques and the practices of changing our body states, some through the ways in which we interact with others, and the other category being through ingestion and through the preparation of things that we ingest, and of course, the things that we find and discover out in the world, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go to the next. I wanted to invoke these two works, not usually seen to be really deeply part of a botanical inquiry. However, The Great Animal Orchestra is a work I can only encourage people to look at. It is the work of a sound engineer who became the founder of what is known as acoustic ecology, all by accident, naturally. He was recording natural environments, and he more or less single-handedly discovered that through spectrographic analysis and actual real deep listening of his own, that one could access the structure of an ecology. That's to say, absolutely invisible aspects of the relational system in an ecology. For example, what he would do, he would record, he record a forest and all of the density of and interaction of acoustic signaling only inside of an ecosystem. And then there would be a clear cutting operation. And then there would be the restoration of the ecology by the logging company. And then what he would show is that even though the landscape was returned beautifully to the original look and feel, a simple spectrographic sampling of that environment would reveal that only a third of the species ever returned, and only a third of the relations, because a spectrographic analysis basically shows how all of the sound generating organisms in the ecology are essentially discovering an acoustical niche for one another and working themselves into a kind of an orchestra. Anyway, it's a wonderful book because it is revealing. It reminds us exactly how all of our senses, shall we say, need to be employed, need to be engaged, if you like, in a way that actually takes us out entirely outside of our normal, shall we say, states of consciousness. And that it is perhaps that endowment, almost you could say that primordial evolutionary endowment, which we also ignore today, through our separation, if you like, from these processes of physis, let's say, and the logos. Oh, and The Art of Tracking, all I can tell you is it's an extraordinary book. primarily to do with the ways of reading the environment from the point of view of spoor, which are signs or markings. That's to say, a spoor, it's an English word, very rarely used in North America, very frequently used, obviously, in South Africa, where the Dutch have. But anyway, it is what Liebenberg has been able to both show and argue through the analysis of those same groups that I mentioned, the Zhuhuanzi, or the so-called Bushmen, is their capacity to read the environment and to be able to read the traces in the environment post facto, long after certain events have transpired, or shall we say, in the unfolding, shall we say, of an environment, as in during a hunt, or at any other moment where resources are being sought for and discovered, and then utilized, exploited, employed, integrated, incorporated, et cetera, et cetera. He shows basically that these capacities are human capacities, and that the what we could say, the disciplined application of a deep kind of attention actually represents the first forms of science. Also, I'd have to say this book had a great effect on me when I was in Africa, trying to study ecologies and things like that. As a layperson, I don't rank among you rest of you guys. I'm not in your world. I wish I could be. But I would say that when I discovered this book, and that very idea, that there was a prehistoric, or shall we say, a Stone Age science, was the reason I used the word science in the course I used to teach at Harvard, called A Science of the Environment, which I have to say is the course that allowed me to meet Alexandra. And I have to say, somewhere in that use of words, somehow in that chemical signaling, I have to say, I feel that some of what made today possible happened. Go to the next slide. I got to run. Boy, oh boy. Look, these are extraordinary books. I'm not going to talk too much about these, but I do want to say these books are organized in a traditional way and in a deeply non-traditional way. In a sense, it's what's plant by plant, as if you were looking at a Linnaean genera type of distribution, as if you were actually just looking at an anatomical classification of plants. However, each one has several pages in which we are, okay, I'm gonna have to skip ahead because I'm not gonna be able to present I want to tell you what she classifies plants in terms of their nutrition, in terms of their medicinal capacities, in terms of the superstitions which are associated with those plants in the locale in which they grow. I want to say that this is a very important aspect of understanding, of use, of study of plants, because it brings back, if you like, it re-embeds the human and evolutionary process, the human culture and human awareness, human conscious, human rituals, human practices, if you like, in the engagement with plants, which is probably taking place over many centuries, even millennia. But this is a very important aspect because this is an ethnobotany. She includes, the technical deployments of these plants, how they're used, for example, in the technical and economic apparatus, their role, the plant's role, for example, as they play in a variety of other animals is umwelts, or the animals' environments, because plants play different roles. They have different statuses depending on the nervous system of the animal in question and the environment, if you could say, and the ecology that corresponds to the nervous system of all these different animals, which is to say that ultimately the better understanding of our ecologies is really to understand that sentience in many ways, and this overlapping of sentience, even places where they radically do not overlap, because of course we know that no animal is capable of inhabiting the universe, shall we say, the sentient universe or the sensory universe of another animal. But the point basically being is that it is through the plants and all of the other beings, shall we say, through which those arrangements, those organizations, which are actually matrices of exploitation, matrices, if you like, they're entire worlds, shall we say. And this is where, this is where the wondrousness, shall we say, of nature can be accessed. All right, let's go to the next one. There is no next one. So what I'd like
That's
you to do
it.
now, no, keep going. No. There's one last slide. No, because I actually planned, please go through it to the very last slide in the next series.
Oh, there is another series.
Yeah, but you got it. If you could just go through to the very last slide and put it up on the screen.
The very last slide.
No. But you better let me go through it with you because you're going to run into another lecture.
Sorry.
Look, just go through to Chandra Bose's book. Or maybe the one even before that.
Yes.
I'm not seeing it on the screen. If you do it, I think you'll have to throw it up on screen. So let me say it while you do that. Yeah, so can you go to the previous slide, just so I can remind myself if I added 2 slides? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm just going to let this be up there for the students. Rupert Sheldrake, I guess, who works with Kell from what I understood. This is senior. This is Rupert Sheldrake's, this is Sheldrake senior, and Terence McKenna. Sheldrake is a well-known botanist and a well-known quasi, who knows, quack or visionary. In any case, I will say this, it would be impossible to dismiss the entirety of his work because it's all brilliant, regardless of whether its eccentricity carries it into a realm of fancifulness or not. I would say that the New Science of Life is a work which provides a framework, which the ultimate concept here is that Sheldrake's ultimate thesis is that plants transmit awareness, shall we say, or they organize consciousness in a certain way. The thesis is picked up by Terence McKenna, who wrote copiously and very vividly for the longest time, but he, among other things, he proposed that plants and humans have a direct co-evolutionary relationship. And just as the harvesting of nutrients, calories and all other things from the environment is what sustained, if you like, our physical bodies and helped them evolve, that the various aspects of phytochemistry are actually responsible for having developed the human brain to the capacity, for the capacities of which it is capable. Now let's go to the last one. I want to say that this is a work that before this conference, I pulled 7 or 8 landscape designers and botanists. I mean, botanists sort of know Chandra, but none of the landscape people, none of the plant experts knew of Bose's work. And my research, anyway, what bottom line is this? The nervous mechanism of plants, let's leave it at that. Bose discovered and proved that there is something like a nervous system in plants. This work was done, I believe, in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Bose's work is starting to get more and more attention these days, but only because he absolutely proved that not only do plants communicate chemically and mechanically, but also electrically. So I'm going to leave it there. I just want to say this, though, is that, of course, I completely miscalculated the time it would take to do this presentation. And what I ran you through was what I thought would be my first run through. The second one was to provide the hard data and the hard information and the hard ideas. But I'm going to leave it there because I think you get the idea. And if you don't get the idea, I simply want to argue that it is the human-plant interface. We should not be timid. We should not be timid in engaging, if you like, this problem. I call it a kind of an expanded ethnobotany. But what I mean by timid is that one talks in comfortable ways about healing, shall we say, that's a term that's often used, the division of man versus, or humans, if you like, versus the natural world. My argument suggests that it goes far beyond that, and that the plant intelligence, shall we say, that people are starting to speak about, and the obvious intelligence that we can use in a more mundane way about humans, or simply this thing that we call this force, this life force, this animism, shall we say, for example, is it not in fact something that exists inside of us? Does the plant not exist inside of us? And do we not exist inside of plants? That does not necessarily constitute a purely fanciful notion. And the final thing I want to say is there is massive documentation for the history of that posture. And it is widely understood that whether it is true or not, it sustained and made possible human survival through the ages. In other words, it worked. It belongs to our evolutionary endowment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanford. Thank you. Well, stop sharing your screen. And wow, that's a lot to take in. And I did prepare really just 3 questions to my guests. I might not even be able to go through the 3 questions, but I wanted to start with just digging a little bit more into what plant potential is. And I will actually really quickly return to what you were just talking about, Sanford, although I was planning to ask you my question later, but it's connected. So I invited all of you here because, of course, I believe that each of you taps into plant potential in ways that are way richer and fuller than a simple instrumentalization of plants for economic growth or sustainable development. That in one way or another, you all construct realities that are environmentally, socially, neurologically, or psychically novel and promising. And that in some way, your work is driven by a deeper aspiration and a form of trans-individual communal goal. So, and I say tap into plant potential, but perhaps I should actually say actualize, as this potential is already there. As perhaps Spinoza and Deleuze after him would put it, it's active at an invisible to us level, virtually present, but not actually actualized. So what is then, according to each of you, what is the plant potential that we should be striving to activate? And you've talked about it in the presentations, but I wanted to return to like one particular thing in each case. And maybe let me just jump to you, Sanford, first, because it's related to what you were talking to. So I know that many indigenous languages don't really have a word for nature. We needed it because we basically estranged ourselves from it. And now, while many thinkers have been trying to convince us to almost abandon the term, you have brought it back on purpose in the recent log series. Now, when we breathe and when we eat, we engage in this never-ending exchange with plants. One moment they are container nature, next thing we know, they are contained in us, in our nature. You were just talking about it. In The Life of Plants, a recent book by Emanuele Coccia, he observes that plants, and I quote, he says, plants demonstrate that life is a rupture in the asymmetry between container and contained. When there is life, the container is located in the contained and is thus contained by it, and vice versa. The paradigm of this mutual overlap is what the ancients called breath, pneuma. To blow, to breathe, means in fact to have this experience, What contains us, the air, becomes contained in us. And conversely, what was contained in us becomes what contains us. To breathe means to be immersed in a medium that penetrates us with the same intensity as we penetrate it. Now, I didn't really know what you would be talking about, but I feel like really relates to your last, comments. And I'm wondering if thinking with plants and contemplating plants is really a potential way to abolish the bifurcation of nature, to use Whitehead's term. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh no, there we go. Well, first let me say that I love that idea, and I'm aware of it, that there are a great number of civilizations, cultures that don't have a word for nature, but that's because they don't need it. And the reason they don't need it, it's because, like that famous title of the book by David Foster Wallace, This is Water. And he talks about the fish going by. And the thing is, they're not aware of it because they are immanent to it. They are entirely indistinct, undifferentiated, and unseparated, if you like, from this thing. Now, we all talk about what it's going to take, given our recent, and I may say recent, our last 300-400 years of intellectual and cultural training, which always sees ourselves as being creatures in nature at best, and not, of course, as nature, which of course that phrase was invoked today. There's no doubt about it. It was even put up on the screen, though that is never enough because it sounds routine. It sounds familiar, whereas the experience of oneself as nature is almost always classified as a non-ordinary experience. And again, that's another side to what I was talking about here, is that is the foundation of virtually all religion. That's to say, all religious feeling, as William James would describe it. It really has to do with the apprehension of one's self contained, and the world container as indistinct and not separate. So I will say that, we need the word nature, and we've lost the word nature. I mean, in the sense that there is so much, if I may say it this way, I hope I don't offend anyone, there is so much chatter among armchair academics about how nature and culture, how nature basically doesn't exist. It's a fabrication, it's a construction, that it's rife with, biases, et cetera. But my argument would simply be, we need to revive the word. We need to revive the notion, because we need to transform and redirect attention. That we will use that word nature until it is no longer necessary. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way, another thing that ought to be said, and I always like this phrase actually of Terence McKenna when he referred to the archaic revival. And ultimately what he's arguing, in his case, it was through the discovery of, it was through the engagement with the plant world, especially through the psychoactive chemistry of dimethyltryptamine, that's to say the chemicals found in the vines in the Amazon and elsewhere, or in the mushrooms, for example, that are native to Mexico. And he basically believed that the challenge to much of modernity and its overcoming and its potential for moving for development and for progress existed in the revival of archaic forms of experience and archaic knowledge. In other words, maybe we've got to stop calling it archaic, because we can discover it instantaneously as present right inside of us. It's it's not gone anywhere. We've just blockaded it, if you like. We no longer have access to it. Although, of course, anyway, I'll leave it at that. Maybe it can provoke some.
Thank you, Sanford. While you're talking about this, I was thinking about something that Ron said in the documentary, Can You Dig This? And there's something really profound to me, yet very, very simple. He basically, at some point, Ron, you say that compost changed your life. And you say, and I quote you, "It literally made me realize that nothing ever dies, ever." End of quote. While looking at a handful of dead leaves, you say, again, that's energy. This turns into rich, life-giving soil. To me, it was stunning. I stopped it, I listened to it a couple of times. And, while I'm talking about plant potential, you are already pointing towards the soil. You say we are nature. There's this whole thing of bifurcation doesn't exist to you. What is the potential that you see in this inseparable plant-soil entanglement that goes beyond growing food?
I don't know if it's an entanglement, and I got to thank you, because I didn't really think anybody listens to what I say. So the fact that
I listened 3
you
times.
will put it repeat, I'm like, wow, you just my mind is blown. I mean, I don't think it's entanglement. I think it's the way the system is designed. I mean, people don't get it. We're spinning around on a ball in outer space, but we're looking for aliens. We're aliens. You know what I'm saying? It's like that right now we're spinning around on a ball, but nobody thinks about that. And nobody thinks about that spinning creates energy, creates inertia, prana, whatever you want to call it, but it's energy. And so that energy is in all of us. That electric. So I ask people, okay, so, what are we? And people are like, oh, and I said,
are we plants? Are we soil?
Yeah, I mean, we're all that. What do we turn to when we supposedly die? What do our bodies go to? It decomposes and turns in, just like a leaf. A leaf falls for a reason in a particular season. It's by design. We're carbon, and we turn into soil. We decompose the same way everything does. And that decompose, it's not over, because what happened to the energy? If you listen to, I didn't go to college like y'all, but I know this one guy said energy never dies. So what happens to our energy? The planet is still spinning, still generating energy. And I asked that question, okay, what does that tell you when you see this dead stuff in this compost that we've considered dead because it's brown, and then the green stuff, it has nitrogen, and the brown stuff, you have carbon. And then, if you make a compost pile, you're only supposed to have 40% of this and 60% of that. And that's bullshit. It's like, that's man stuff. Nature is not counting the leaves that fall on the ground. Say, hey, wait a minute. We got too much nitrogen. We need more, carbon. Nature don't do that, and it's still going to turn the soil. So we are still screwing stuff up like that. So what brought me is, with the compost thing, it just let me know, like, that energy, because all of a sudden I have 160 degrees, 150 degrees in this compost of this stuff that was supposed to be dead. Where did it come from? Where did that energy, where did that heat come from? And if people don't get it, we're energy, period. And it's because of this planet spinning around. It's just like a tire wheel. I don't know if anybody had a bike and they had the light on the front tire, and it would spin, and then the light would go on, because the spinning of the wheel generated electricity, and the faster you went, the brighter it went. That's the same thing that happens to us on this ball that we're spinning on. It's creating.
It seems that the plants, and through plants, the soil made you think about cycles and how we're part of those cycles. And it's interesting how that actually connects to Maya Ling's work, who talks about resource cycling, and resource cycling is really one way to define, although really only temporarily and locally, the universal course of entropy, right? By cycling things, recycling and upcycling resources, we can actually minimize the wasteful waste of using energy, which is something you're talking about as well. Mylene, maybe can be a question to you. How far do you think we can push the use of those agricultural byproducts in architecture? Do you think that they can actually compete with the mainstream materials? What is the potential here of this cycling and recycling and upcycling?
Yeah, it's a question I think about a lot. Anytime, just thinking back to that scale of mechanical to filtration transformation pathways, the stronger you make something, the more you're introducing high energy processes, chemicals that can resist degradation, which, all affect the return to soil. And I don't know, I think that for me, trying to understand that question led me back to the soil. There's an ancient practice of soil regeneration in Ghana, in the central region, that is called proka, which is basically every time you sell or harvest a crop, the waste, there's a very sophisticated way of layering all of this waste on the soil in certain quantities, in certain spaces, and understanding that, the material properties of each of these layers. In some ways, I'm sort of working backwards and understanding, for example, what types of materials, for example, the coconut husk, how long does it take for those bonds to break down? The coconut husk resists degradation in a way that probably no other crop I've seen, agricultural waste crop I've seen does. And so it's kind of like this razor blade concept that I keep thinking about or coming back to, where there are certain materials that can withstand the test of time. In fact, the more they reside in storage conditions, there's the drying out of the material, which all ages it slowly. It's a very deep concept of time in terms of degradation. And then there are materials that are the blade that switch in and switch out. And given the way we produce agricultural waste today, there are a lineage of cash crops, materials and byproducts that need to cycle that way. In fact, they want to be cycled that way due to their compositions. And so I think trying to understand that in terms of degradation going back to the soil and working backwards from that, not just in the building sector, but the food, the culinary, the agricultural, might be a way of understanding, how long these materials should be around, should last before they're ready to go back to the soil. So I don't know, it's still something I'm thinking about. It very much depends on the materials themselves. Yeah.
It's amazing how this cycling is taking you out of the architectural science, which you kind of started with, right? And just by really paying attention to the relationships, ecological relationships, you're forced to actually embrace other disciplines and interact with chefs and urban ecologists and soil scientists. There's a lot of speculation that necessarily once we look and contemplate and meditate on things, it just pushes us out of our field to speculate in broader ways.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that as architects, I feel that we've fully forgotten how to engage our senses in relationship to the materials we're working with. In the culinary arts, taste, apart from sex, is one of those activities that engages all of our senses. Yeah. And in some ways, what we're eating tells us about things that we are so alienated from, subterranean or otherwise. Thermally, they propose a thermal paradigm that is so opposite of the way we live today, mechanically, materially, where comfort is sort of buffered. It happens in transitory moments. It's not instant to the press of a button and you get a reliable controlled temperature. And so I think that engaging our senses with the material is something we've just completely lost, you know, in the way we design and spec materials, and somehow going to these other disciplines at the borders of our homes, our buildings, has been, you know, a very rich platform to sort of reconnect with that, you know.
Yeah. So there's actually potential in plants to push us outside of our comfort zones because we're so intricately connected with other things. Thank you, Mylene. Oliver, I'm thinking as Mylene is talking about her speculations and crossing boundaries, I was thinking about, you know, how you think about plant potential in your speculative botany experiments. For example, the example of the plant hybridization that you mentioned in your presentation, or your more investigative rather than remediation-driven work with rural landscapes. They seem to be ways to ask actually cultural questions rather than environmental questions or purely, environmental remediation kind of driven questions. How do you think about that aspect of your work, the potential of plants to actually reconnect us with cultural issues and help us ask cultural questions?
Well, I think there's this sort of through line here that this idea of nature culture separation, which should never have happened, and you know, in Buddhist philosophy, there's this idea of the no separation between the self and other, and that's everything, right? So this idea that we are nature, and there's also this idea of thusness, you know, or heicity, or things as they are. Like sometimes things as they are quite interesting. Like a field of weeds can be quite interesting and very generative. And in a way, that system is sort of sorting things out. Many of the plants in sort of industrial wastelands are healing the soil by accumulating toxic metals without us doing anything. So we so are often compelled, you know, as I guess designers or activists to do things, right? To always like feel we need to fix things. And yet the natural process is this sort of immanence that Sanford talked about, you know, or Kurt Vonnegut talked about, the universal will to become, right? These forces are just so great. The plants, they want to do this, right? And so in a way, this idea of symbiosis or partnership is much more exciting than a sort of schism, right? So and also there's a real I really think that there's a underappreciated, not by this crowd but out there in the world, the role of intuition. You know, what Eduardo, you know, talking about building without plans, you know, this idea of trusting your sensitivity to the other that's not the other, it's actually you. The idea that this relationality between you and these organisms is very generative and ancient, and you can actually trust a relationship if you don't sort of contaminate it with too much, like, you know, I got to do sort of mechanical sort of you know, teleological. I've got to do this thing. I've got to have this outcome, right? This idea, we're very outcome driven, you know. So this idea of these kind of contemplative practices around working with plants, I in some ways I find more interesting. So the older I get, the less in a way I want to do, and I'm always asking myself the question, what can I not do as a designer, and what can you know, these imminent forces actually do by themselves.
It's incredible how in some of your projects you basically realize by just contemplating weeds and how they relate to each other, where they came from, we actually start listening to narratives or telling us something about how we came to certain places, how different cultures started to inhabit cities, right? Like I remember you were talking about that I think it was in a Toronto project.
Absolutely, yeah, and you can, track human history through the plants that we've dragged around. I mean, the Roman Colosseum, was one of the first sites that people noticed. Oh my God, the plants inside the Colosseum are different than outside. Like, why is that? Well, people had been using the Colosseum and had traveled there from all over and died there, and so the whole sort of botany of the Colosseum was unique and sort of a function of the sort of cultural history. So that there's this constant layering, and that's really interesting. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And this idea of returning things to a pristine state is something I'm very critical of. Like, so much of ecology is about, we need to, bring everything back to, I don't know, a state of sort of prelapsarian intactness, which never really existed. I mean, human beings have been moving plants around since forever. Like every culture moves plants around, some through agriculture. Sometimes it's just a happenstance thing, but we've never not disturbed things. But sometimes that's important. Sometimes that disturbance is creative and productive. It's not always damaging.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Roth, that actually makes me think of the question I wanted to ask you was about the potential of certain heterogeneous relationships that you are creating. So you are a foreigner based in Mexico, and you operate, in this context of high-end ecotourism that very often attracts very wealthy Westerners, travelers that are simply hungry for otherworldly experiences. But what is central to your work is the emphasis that you put on the importance of working with indigenous people and the importance of learning from how they relate to the natural environment, including, of course, the local flora, the plants. So what is the potential that you see in confronting such different and often hostile worlds, if that's of any importance to you?
Well, our pillars are art, ancestry, and nature, and our goal is to reconnect people with themselves, the others, and the environment. And so we are focused on put life and community at the center and develop the business that can be developed, maintaining the focus on the center and the priority to the community and the nature, means all the resources. So now, for example, we are directed all the efforts of all the enterprise to the water. So we are designing in clothes, we are using more and more ecosystems to, for example, we always create fashion out of shit discarded from the hotel. And we dye with trash from the kitchen and natural flowers. And we use rainwater, and we recycle constantly, so we reutilize all the clothes. Even we receive clothes from the customers and re-dye and modify the clothes. So I haven't buy clothes in many years, because one day one piece of fabric is it's a pant, or the day is a hem, or the day is it's changing, or it's a cushion. Everything is. So I love when Ron say that he don't throw anything away. We don't throw anything away, anything. A piece of fabric this size, we conserve and we use it for something. But for me, my challenge, my personal challenge, is to create a group of people that can see what happens and get out of the square, get out of the limited mind. So after reading thousands of books, I go to the Amazonia and I spend 1 year with shamans, and I take all kind of entheogenic plants. My mind blow up, and I understand. So I understand very clear that our only option is nature, because if we come from the nature and if we don't go back to this full symbiosis, we have no chance. So we are limited with a conception of the reality. And because all the problems that bring our civilization to this point is the use of this part of our body. But our body is smart, the full body. And if we go down to our heart, we start feeling things. Because when you take ayahuasca, for example, what happens is that the pineal start producing DMT that open the function of both minds that happens normally when you're born and when you die. So this experience of see the full reality, and ayahuasca is soft. There are other like bufo, that is the direct experience of the light of the sun. So when you has this experience, you are never again the same, because you see what is real, and you see forever, and you don't forget it never. And you wake in the middle of the night with this experience again, and you say, wow, how can I share this with my people? So how can I transmit this experience so everybody can see what I saw? So this is my personal challenge. And our challenge as a tribe is the water. We will work the next years completely focused in clean water in everywhere, and we will make videos and series because we want to get a scale with that for Netflix, using experience with artists, relevant artists in the world, celebrities, scientists, communities, everybody in different part of the planet, making an activation in some place to clean and resolve the problem in the water. For example, now is a group of Peruvian women try to get the recognition of a river as a living being. So I love that, because one of the Mapuches, I told you my experience with the Mapuches, was a girl that when a group of entrepreneurs want to produce some dumps in the rivers there, she's opposite, and she was always laboring with his hands trying to talk. And they say, why do you want to talk? Because the entrepreneurs say, we will bring electricity, we will bring a school, we will bring roads. And they say, and she went to talk, and she said, we don't need a school, we don't need light, we don't need road. The only thing we need is that you leave. So please leave. And she make all the town leave, standing and say, please leave. Leave us, because we are living in harmony with nature, because the original communities have a wisdom that we don't have. So when you have lived with these people, you understand that what they are seeing in the jungle is completely millions of different levels of knowledge that you don't understand. So every plant give you a completely full dimension of possibilities. And these possibilities help you in everything. It help you in design, in produce, in broke all the limits of your mind on the project that you can do, open the possibilities and all the resources that exist around us, and we are destroying like kids. Well, no kids, the kids don't destroy, like crazy people. Yeah. So, well, it's very difficult to transmit this idea, but what I suggest is that everybody pay attention to the book as McKenna that we see with our friend, because he make a practice of that, and he explained the evolution of humanity across the use of these entheogenic plants. I have a friend who is an ethnologist and archaeologist, everything in Mexico, and every time that a new piece or container is discovered from hundreds of thousands of years ago in Mexico, he make the proof to check if they are using some entheogenic plant in there, and it's almost a constant. All the ancient people evolved through the use of entheogenic plants. This is the McKenna theory. What do you think, Sanford?
I'd just like to give you, I just want to, you're using a word that most people will not have heard. It's entheogenic in English.
Yes, entheogenic. Exactly.
Entheogens.
It is.
Yeah.
It's the plant who show you God.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is real. You see God through the plant, but it's important to get down from your mind and experience it in your heart, because we have mind in the heart, in the full body, and the plants open this knowledge and these capacities.
It actually makes me think, the fact that even for those of us who don't go to these levels, have never had, or maybe will never have this experience of interacting with plants in this ways, there's something in your way of constructing spaces that gives us a possibility of getting out of the box, getting out of that tunnel vision, just because of the way you build, the way you construct spaces. And, I think about the fact that you heavily rely on untreated wood, right? Just to kind of bring it back to architecture for a moment. And you use logs and branches and twigs and everything else that is very different from our standardized materials, such as, you could be using 2x4 studs or glulam beams, but you don't use them. You use all this rough materials. And I know that normally we use the word foraging to talk about foraging for food, but it seems to me that what you communicate is almost like foraging for materials. And even more, as you forage for those materials, it's almost like a process of foraging for ideas. It seems to me that the plants, both the living plants that you work around and the dead plants that you use to construct these buildings, that they actually offer you a direction, that they're guiding you. As you said before, they kind of suggest certain forms, and you build around them, and you build with them. What is the reason for operating like this? Can you just talk a little bit more about how you construct architectures to kind of achieve the same things that can be achieved by using plants, to kind of alter our ways of seeing the world and to expand our vision?
Well, the answer is the same. I was living a boring life until my mind opens, and then I discovered architecture 5 years ago, and I can stop doing architecture. But it's not only architecture, it's a lot of things that we are doing, because this experience blowing my mind and my urgency to help communities around the world. So our commitment is to work with the communities, specifically in Peru, that are 1,000 communities of Shipibos that I'm very committed to help, because they have a knowledge, an infinite knowledge of medicinal plants and that are being destroyed along with the jungle. So protect these plants for our medicine as entheogenic plants. I think as long as protect these people to survive and to teach us is essential for our surviving.
Thank you.
So I don't think, I know that I don't answer exactly your question, but I don't think in materials. I give you an example. I was not interested 5 years ago of building. I want to make a dome because I want to play Tibetan drums inside. But the government doesn't give me the permission to make the concrete. So I say, what can I do? If I do the 6-around-1, that this is science of divinity worldwide known, and it's beautiful, it will, and if I put the trunks from the top to down, I can make a building that can be sounds properties to make it something that sounds well, because a palapa is not, and I can do the concrete. So I said, we will build the building top to down. And everybody loved it. So it's impossible, because these pieces has more than 1.5 tons each one, and you want to put 9, 6, 7 there in top. and 20 meters high and put the trunks down, how you will carry the trunks is many tons each one. We don't have technology, we don't have laser to, how do you will do that? And the sense that something can't be done is something that I can accept and say, we will build top to down. And in this moment, I get in love with architecture, and the people say, but how you will cover? I don't care how to cover, it's a problem for later. So one of our principles is that we don't resolve the problems, because architecture is focused on resolve problems, and we don't resolve problems. So perhaps we are making a structure for a house, and I found a hole and in a wall, and say, what is that? To get in the home. I say, but this is a problem for later. But how we will access the home? I don't care. We are working following the form. Finally, the entrance is 8 meters high, and you go in and out and in and out by the platform. So the forms are completely unexpected, and we discovered in the process the solution, as was the solution to cover the roof, and so we fit the problems, and they become so big that the solution have to be completely extraordinary or different to everything.
Mm-hmm.
So not only in the architecture, but in everything we do, we worship the problems. The problems are great mm-hmm. masters, and they come with an amazing treasure inside. So we don't want to find solution in advance. We want to do the work, the path, and improvise in the spot, in the instant. Don't keep in time to remember, to apply, to mm-hmm. use something that we know, but found solution and in the spot. And this is something that in the jungle is the common, because people who live in the jungle have to take fast decisions, and then you start accessing to other levels of wisdom that we have, mm-hmm. and that is what, for example, we discovered that a cloth designer and a DJ are very talented to write a movie as movie writer. So we are preparing a movie of our tribe, and that was something that I have done before in the past. So I discovered the capacities of them, but they don't know they have these capacities. But when somebody discovers something out of his area of expertise that perhaps is his hidden passion, the people is so happy and evolve and discover even more capacities that they have. So we all the time give the people the opportunity to work in an area that there are not expertise. And I am not interested in the mm-hmm. expertise, but in the adventure of life of the people. So perhaps there is the people have a training in some, of course, is useful, the training, the use of the mind and the resources, but the adventure of discover and improvise and contact con other forms is as Oliver says about the knowledge is all around, no? O sea, the intelligence is all around. We are surrounded because anything is empty. The consciousness is everything. Everything is intelligence in it. So we can, in any moment, we can create magic out of nothing because everything is conscious. I don't know how to explain it. Sorry that I take so much time.
No, it's wonderful. You mentioned Oliver. I was thinking about how you actually, when it comes to kind of modalities of engagement, how you oscillate between this, what you call, I think, passive investigations and activism. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, you know, how you decide actually when to actively engage with people and plants, and when you think that this passive, or I prefer the maybe term contemplative investigation is a better way to trigger something, some kind of a change that you're after.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's that question really is an intuitive question, and a lot of it has to do with intuition. I mean, the space in which you find yourself, the space of, you know, the ecological space, the space of relations between people and human and non-human subjects, I guess. It just varies, and sometimes there are great injustices, like environmental racism or marginality caused by decisions that were made by powerful people that marginalize others, right? So, but that marginalization also affects the non-humans as well. Like there's a sort of the schism between the human and the non-human is amplified by the brutality of capitalism, and so there are times when there is some sort of intervention. It calls out for intervention where to collaborate with the humans and the non-humans to create a more just and more where there's a more even distribution of power and also like a little oasis in a sense from the forces of the instrumental forces of capitalism, where all these spaces, this idea of an open source landscape, to sort of liberate a space to the point where it can control itself in a sense that it doesn't need a urban planner. I mean, I love architects, but this idea that you don't necessarily need architects, everyone has their uses, or me as an artist, right? The idea that things can kind of just run themselves, but sometimes you need to get something over the hump. And this is why I talk about scaffolding. So sometimes a scaffold, it could be a bunch of willow trees, or it could be some permaculture mulching in order to increase the soil bioactivity, will be just enough to create a situation where there'll be sort of critical mass where people will go, oh, I really want to be here, and what can I do? And plants suddenly all say the same thing. That a plant will come up because it's happy and it's got worms, and suddenly you have this whole system that emerges, but it just needs that little push over the fence kind of thing. So that's what I mean. And creating social and economic justice is often that thing that kind of motivates me to at least start. But then it's important to know when to finish, right? And to say, I'm not needed anymore. And the best projects are the ones where everybody's forgotten about me. And it's just, I go as a tourist. It's like, wow, look at that. It's because if I'm indispensable for something, I consider that a failure. I think the most successful projects are projects where I'm not needed. And I mean, it'd be nice if somebody remembers me when I go over there, but ideally not, right? The idea that it's a self-sufficient system.
Well, you acted as a catalyst, you activated the process, and then you're no longer needed. I feel like, exactly. Ron, you kind of do the same in your work. Like you initially maybe grew these plants because you wanted to be surrounded by beauty and you wanted to have fresh food, but that trophic trope, in other words, the food-related narrative kind of later became less important and became an excuse to defy the council members and grow a different breed, as you say, of South Central LA gangsters, right? You turned from gardener to activist, into an activist. Did this surprise you that this way of acting and operating actually allowed you to leverage this incredible potential of plants to change such a difficult to change place as South Central Los Angeles?
Yeah, I mean, it's a miracle when you think about it. I mean, I got an ordinance changed in as little as 2 years that you can plant food on the parkways throughout the city of Los Angeles. I mean, that's unheard of. And basically it came from me being able to embarrass the city, but because I had press everywhere about this, and I was going up against Goliath. It was like what Oliver was saying. My version of what he was saying is, I'll tell people I'll help you, but I'm not the help. So don't get that twisted. It's like, I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to mow your lawn. I'm not going to, pick your fruit for you. I'm not going to plant it for you. I'll show you how. But, it's up to you. And I think and I tell people, and because if you expect somebody to do it for you, and you don't know how, that means you're a slave. And just like a lot of it, people don't realize they're slaves to the system. And a lot of this technology and the phones and the apps, oh, I don't have to know how to cook. I don't have to know how to change my tire. I don't have to know how to change my diaper. I don't have to do nothing because there's an app for that, but there's not an app for integrity or common sense. I haven't seen one, and the ones I did try, they didn't work. So my thing is to show people how it's done, but not to do it for them. And when I work with people, some are like, oh, where should I put this? I'm like, I don't know. Where you want to put it? I mean, it's 12 feet tall and it's purple. So when you walk outside, where do you want to see it? And you have somebody walk a path, and they're usually out. That's one of the things I'll do. I say, lay out the path you want in your garden, and there's always this angle, or the straight angle, and then they go. I'm like, okay, how did that make you feel? I mean, it bothered me that you went and then you did the sharp turn. I said, nothing in nature has edges. Like nothing in nature is basically straight. It's like it's not. So it should flow like water. In your garden, you should feel comfortable. It should be a swaying motion, a dance, not a jerk. So yeah, that is one of my philosophies is because this is a story that you're telling, and I tell people, how do you want to tell your story? What do you want people to see? And my thing is, if we're doing something in an urban environment, I want to see color pops. I want to see beauty. I just don't, to me, like, the farming is like everything's green. You got the rows and rows of lettuce. You got rows and rows of carrot, whatever. I'm like, no, this is an urban setting. So you want to appeal to somebody's sight. I want you to go, oh shit, what's that purple thing back there? I want you to venture into the space, and I want different heights. I want color on the bottom. I want things to pull your eyes. I want things that attract different pollinators. And I mean, that's just me. I don't know if it came from fashion. I don't know, but I want to, if I'm putting something in, I wanted to make a statement, and I wanted to affect people. And that's one of the biggest things with me is, how do we affect change? How do we change people's mind? How do we let them know that you are nature, that you have a value? Because no one's telling these kids that they have a value, because things give you value. It's like nothing you can buy gives you value. So how do we change that mentality? The fact that you would kill somebody over a pair of tennis shoes in certain places? I mean, it's like, what if we've raised greedy bastards? What do we call success? Oh, you're getting this position and getting this, and now I have this car, and now you're on a hamster wheel the rest of your life. I tell people, I woke up this morning, I'm successful. Nothing hurt that bad. So it's like, and we don't celebrate that. We don't celebrate the present.
You've managed to convince people who have never seen a growing vegetable that it's worth to pay attention to that more than
we have to.
tennis shoes, right? Yeah.
No, we have to. And the bottom line, if we get children in the garden early and reinforce it and keep reinforcing, they're going to realize that I'm a part of this planet, and what happens to this planet happens to me. I tell people, if you heal your mother, you heal yourself. And we're destroying and killing our. It's like you buy organic food, but then the wrapper it's in will never decompose. So it's like the dumbest shit like that. I mean, how do we change even these manufacturers mindset, because we're allowing them to kill us?
Merlin, what do you upcycle next to upcycling leftover agricultural products? I know that you work in Ghana with groups of women communities that are actually helping you somehow introduce this new ways of using agricultural byproducts. What are they gaining from that?
Yeah, no, sorry, just a lot of great points in this conversation. So first of all, upcycling all the thoughts from this. But just Oliver said something about, what do we call it? Contemplative. I know the term you used, contemplative, passive I forgot what the term was, versus activism, and what you were motivated by, Oliver, in terms of when you see injustices in Ghana. I think it's a luxury not to do anything. You know, you talk about the the bowels of capitalism, and the African soil, the African labor has been, you know, extracted from for a very long time. And I think that, you know, the challenges here, you know, with respect to this hunger to develop, hunger to have things and lifestyles that, you know, sort of project modernity and progress is overwhelming, you know. And I think for me, the tapping into, you know, indigenous medicine, indigenous use of materials, it's not, I mean, it is in some ways a form of nostalgia, but really it's that the clues to some of the more challenging problems of our time. You know, you talked about water, Roth, and water here is, you know, a completely deplenished resource. And with this women in Ghana, I'd been approached almost about 5 years ago. So these are really high quality textile and a group of home-based enterprises, women who work at home, who need to now, because they've come together and become quite successful, treat their wastewater effluent coming out of their homes. And when you looked at all of the alternatives, from stuff that was used to clean your swimming pool that have aluminum and iron and really corrosive stuff, not just to the human hand, but to the air that is being inhaled, as well as, you know, the water streams that actually accept that water, there was only one solution, and that was this byproduct from the moringa tea industry called press meal, which was very good at serving as a natural flocculant. And the clues for using that as a water, you know, remediation technology was in the ways my dad used to wash his hands in moringa leaves that was soaked in water. And there are so many rituals, and they're not necessarily just environmental, they're woven into culture, they're woven into the rituals in your home, that I think provide, at least for me as an architect and a designer, a way for, let's say, less of a punitive system, less of a system that is all about control, and something's about aspirational and nurturing habits. And so in many ways, I have to say, I think the coconut work and the mycelium work have only been vehicles. Frankly, I think there's a lot of fails in there. At the end of the coconut project, I was like, who the hell in Ghana needs an acoustic panel? And in many ways, it's the failures of that project, you know, everything from how do you get a good quality coconut to this fiber fluff and healthy pith, if you don't engage the actual networks that are, you know, in whose hands they're in. So I think, you know, there's a range of materials. I'll go wherever the clues are. But by and large, I think it's the social models of production, of sharing, exchange, that I think are the bigger barriers for me. And figuring a way to balance that in the research has always been a sort of motivation and challenge. Yeah.
Probably the biggest challenge, and the ultimate goal is affecting those systems, right? I know that we're running out of time. I don't know if you all have 5 more minutes. I'd love to ask Sanford one last question, and then maybe give a couple of minutes to the audience to ask some questions. Is that okay? Sanford, Merlin
You buying lunch?
Yeah, I will do that next time I'm in Los Angeles. I promise, Ron. Sanford, a really quick question, because Merlin mentioned control, and you know, your way of writing is really deeply embedded in science, and yet the power of this writing, at least for me, lies in constantly defying, you know, fallacies and falsities and pointing towards other more enriching and transformative ways of knowing the world. How do we moderns, and in part you've already answered these questions, but how do we moderns obsessed with this rational knowledge and empirical evidence can start activating the potential of other ways of knowing? Where do we look? Where do you guide us, designers?
Well, first thing I'd like to say, just by way of observation, is among our colleagues here today, we have some extraordinary, I don't know if we call them confessions, but we have some extraordinary demonstrations of different minds. Ultimately, you know, look, you take Ron, who talks about things like their everyday shit that he reads in the newspaper, when in fact, he has completely entered into another universe. His ability to see his own flesh in a handful of mulch, that's a transposition. That's an extraordinary achievement, shall we say, even though for him it wasn't an achievement. It was absolutely natural. That's to say, it's the style, essentially, it's the style of his experience and the way he processes it. But I will say this, the question, of course, is how can you extend this to others? Now, I'll give you another example. Eduardo, for example, who told us an incredible story of a kind of enlightenment. In other words, how he connects what he does, who he is, to what others do and what others have shown him in relation to whatever it was, maybe the year he spent in the real jungles, and maybe with people whose lives are dedicated to crossing over the boundary, if you like, the so-called shamanic forms of knowledge and understanding. But he's incorporated it into it now. What does he do? He's got a business. Like, isn't it extraordinary that those things can exist, if you like, in the same Umwelt. The word that comes to me is that word of von
World, yeah.
The same, this is the same worldview. This is to say, these guys represent, for example, and then I see an act like Oliver's of transposing his forest. I mean, what I read about these days is the way in which many, many botanists and ecologists today are scrambling wildly to accelerate the migration of forests, contrary to the conservative, responses that he may have got at a certain time in a certain place from the ecologists who told him, don't bring these forests here. They're not native. The fact of the matter is with climate change, and let me point another thing out. I shouldn't divulge. I would say that, listen, he's working here. He's working on an instinct because he's already completely entered in some way into the world of, shall we say, modifying the surfaces of the world with living matter. There's a move there that he doesn't have to understand to realize or to discover later that it belongs to a larger logic, and maybe even somehow to a larger reparative logic. It's true, we have to help our forests migrate. That's something I read about and I believe. It's because they are not going to move fast enough to keep up with the transformations. Again, something that came immediately, it comes directly from von Humboldt, who showed us exactly how a plant every individual plant actually is an expression of 30 or 40. He only had 17 categories or 18 categories in his list, in his big map of the Chimborazo mountain, which was the basis of that work that he did on the geography of plants. But in fact, today we could add many, many more. I point out that some ecologists, I guess, or botanists in France went to Chimborazo in order to compare what they would find with what von Humboldt found 250 years ago. And they discovered that the tree line had moved 650 feet in elevation. In other words, what we have is an extraordinary experience of this shift, of this migration, of this dynamism. But of course, it tells us, certain interventions are probably now going to be required. So when you ask this, I would simply say this is what, what I found fascinating and why I somehow started paying attention again, not only because all of these younger people around me are paying attention to this stuff, but that's to say that plants, thanks to some wonderful writers and researchers, plants are claiming new attention today, and that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for transformation. And I'm talking about even ultimately epistemological, cognitive, noospheric, nous meaning, mind. It's an opportunity for us to transform because we are also part of this ecology, regardless of how toxic we've made ourselves. And I would say our task, or at least mine from the point of view of a writer or a philosopher, is to provide a coherent cosmology for this opportunity, this new, because plants are revealing themselves to us now in entirely new ways. They're not just beautiful. They're not just healing. They're not just relaxing. They're actually now, they represent, frankly, a form of intelligence. On Star Trek, I keep reading this, by the way, while I was preparing. I keep reading about the galactic, and I'm fascinated that the writers got a hold of this, the galactic mycorrhizal network. I don't know, guys, is that real? I don't know. There's probably people in our audience who know whether that's actually true or not. The suggestion, the model of the galactic mycorrhizal network suggested that there were these real things, like wormholes or transmissive meshes, if you like. Look, for example, one could take the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox of how it is that something that happens light years away can manifest its effect, completely unexplainable. I'm not saying that I'm not going into the mysticism. I'm simply saying the mycorrhizal galactic network, it's a fascinating imaginative idea. But it also tells us, well, the reason, people accuse me in many cases of being very scientifically oriented, it just strikes me that there are things which lie outside of normal accepted conceptions. But if you can root them in the realities of matter, in the pragmatic demonstration of their reality, you've gone a great step, if you like, in removing the smug dismissals, all right, which we all encounter, and we're going to continue to encounter.
Sanford, are you familiar with the aspen trees?
Yes. What are you referring to now? You're talking about the way
Michael, right? The fact that they all talk to each other, the fact that they all communicate with each other.
Yeah, I'm reading tons of stuff about that. Now, the fact of the matter is, there's a lot to know. There's a lot more to know. For example, how an aspen tree knows which of all the other aspen trees is kin. I don't understand any of that stuff yet. I haven't read the books yet, but it's a fascinating idea. The fact of the matter, though, is that this managing system, I don't know, for example, we do it, but we don't see it in the framework of the more universal, let's just say the more universal physis or physis, or the more universal logos. But what we are knowing is that the botany of the last 5 years is telling us, look, pay attention, and discover it with your own hands.
Thank you, Sanford. Before I open it, just for a couple of questions from the audience, maybe the fact that we, things that we didn't know 10 years ago, we know now, and we know that there are hundreds of other things that we still don't know. But there are indigenous people out there who, in a way, have understood, respected, and embraced this fact for such a long time that we really need to be looking to them to learn these things. And I think probably this would be a topic for a totally new event, thinking about indigenous wisdom, but also really thinking about what it means to know without really relying just on our reason and accepting that certain things are not accessible to us in this ways. And there are other forms of knowing that are out there, and we should be probably embracing all of them at the same time. And I think plants probably are helping us to think about it, at least meditate on that. Are there any questions from the audience, whoever is still here, who would like to ask a question? I really apologize that we're so late, but I'd love to give an opportunity to someone to ask a question or two.
May I ask a question, Alexandra?
Yes, hello, Victoria. Nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you. Thank you everyone for this beautiful contribution. I'm really moved and I really appreciate everything that has been said so far. It's really kind of eye-opening, and I think it's interesting because even though a lot of people, even especially during the pandemic, have kind of paid a lot more attention to planting and have kind of realized how much they miss the natural environment, I think plants still kind of remain one of the most misunderstood life forms on this planet. And I've always wondered if it's due maybe to a completely different intelligence. I mean, Sanford was talking about it now just in the last comments. And I mean, it's interesting to think about it because the intelligence of plants is so distributed. Plants and fungi kind of have a very different mode of operation. And I feel like it's almost something that kind of is a stark contrast to the presumably so centralized intelligence that modern humans have falsely, I think, heralded for centuries. And maybe this exposure, I mean, even today, we've learned so much to be exposed to this distributed intelligence. Maybe that's a way to kind of get out of this self-inflicted and almost damaging isolationism that we have created for ourselves, and maybe kind of become more participatory and live and think differently in that participatory mode. I mean, Sanford was bringing up Goethe and all these other people that kind of like already kind of marched in front of us and we can follow. But my question for everyone kind of would be on that note of experience, what was kind of a specific personal experience for you, for each of you, that kind of made you realize that plants have already been your teachers? What have been moments in your path, maybe also unconscious, subconsciously, where you realized I've already learned so much from plants? And I think that's something I've asked myself as well. So that would be my question. What are experiences that you've had where you've realized I've actually learned so much from plants, maybe also not more intuitively? I guess we've heard a few answers to that, but I would like to know maybe from the other speakers as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Anyone wants to answer?
I think everybody should answer. In the order in which you spoke.
Oliver.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, there's this whole thing about having a green thumb, right? And some people, oh, you've got a green thumb. And I was told as a little boy that I had a green thumb. And I don't know what that really is, other than an openness to what something other than you wants. And I'll tell you a very brief story. When I was a kid, I used to have a sandbox. My father worked night shift in a factory, and he made us a sandbox, and he was around during the day, and we would take worms out of the bottom of the sandbox and cut them in half, and they would be wiggling. And my father came out of the house or the apartment, and he pretended he was crying. And I was just a toddler, and suddenly I realized I'd inflicted suffering on this other being. I'd never realized that it was possible to cause suffering to something that wasn't me, and that a worm would actually feel pain. So it's not a plant, but then I realized that everything can suffer. Everything has wants and feelings and desires and wants to live. And so as a very early child, I realized that everything is like that, and I felt less special, right? I felt like I'm just part of this whole universe of beings, be they worms that I mistakenly cut in half or a radish that I pulled up from the flower bed. There was this sort of epiphany that yes, I'm just like everything else. And so it goes back to very early childhood.
Ron,
Thank you.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll add my 1 cent, but I got a bigger name on the other line that I gotta go attend to, guys. I mean, what this has taught me, what plants have taught me, is nothing ever dies, you know, ever. It's an energy transform. I mean, it's like when you think of how a leaf falls to the ground when it's supposed to, and then so now it's the mulch for that tree. It doesn't fly across the street. It flies right under there. So now it's mulch because it knows the season's gonna come, and it's gonna save the water. And then after that happened, that leaf turns into soil, turns into compost, and it's a cycle. It just that circle. If you think the fruit comes, the leaves come, the leaves fall, the fruit comes, the leaves fall. But I think what we need to think about is what it's just recently like hit me is one tiny little, like I have a pomegranate here. One tiny, teeny little mustard seed has thousands of seeds already in that little teeny tiny mustard seed, because it's just like you take one piece of fruit, a seed from, I don't know, a nectarine, and you put that in the ground, and you're going to get this tree, and you're going to get nectarines, and each one of those nectarines also has a seed in it that has it has more trees in it, which is thousands of seeds. And we're not taught to think about it like that. And I think if we did, we would see just the alchemy and the beauty, the magic that is us, that is nature, that we are nature, So that's what plants taught me. Nothing ever dies, and that we are energy, So I got to bounce, guys.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank
I'll
you
be in
all.
touch. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Just a quick one. This has stayed in my head ever since I visited this farm. And it was a farm in central Ghana that practiced this form of farming called no-till agriculture. And before we were driving into it, we were passing a bunch of pineapple and mango farms. And right before the farm, there was a gutter, a ditch that was filled with worms. And I was like, wait, why are there so many worms in this gutter? And the farmer who ran the farm said that the absence of multiple species of plants and that consistent tilling of the soil meant that everything slow and vulnerable would slide out like a mudslide into that gutter. And it made me really think about the sister crops, the communities of plants that are needed to host many organisms, not just humans, that are cultivating the soil. And that's always struck me as an important process. That farm was also the farm I mentioned in terms of the layered mulching, which was very important for me, in terms of thinking about, the act of decomposing as an act of, nourishing, a wider ecosystem. So it's also worms in a sense, in the absence of plants, that I started to realize how important, these sister crop practices are. So yeah, that's for me.
Roth, Sanford.
Oh, geez, I was sort of hoping that wasn't, oh gosh. Well, first of all, I want to say this, is I hope that if there's a book that comes ultimately out from the relation to this, is that I hope that everybody will write up their experience, which represents a kind of a moment of transformation, I believe, or a moment of jumping, shall we say, of levels of understanding, which is also accompanied by a feeling. I hope that we can include those or even modify in the book as appendices or something like that, because that's part of the answer to the question you asked a lot earlier, Alexandra. Anyway, for me, as a Canadian, I'm a Canadian too. I don't know, really realizes that, Oliver maybe, but anyway, I spent years in trees. I used to love to climb trees, and it meant in Canada generally having constant sap, and I was a mess all the time. It was always in my hair. I could always smell it. It was always sticky. It was always blah, blah, blah. So in a certain sense, I think that they were my intimates, shall we say, for many, many years. But the real thing happened when I was studying some really difficult mathematics early 90s. And under the interest and influence of some of the readings I was doing about the so-called, the third wave stuff that McKenna was writing, I took an entheogen and a big dose, and the answers and the understanding of this mathematics came to me in unbelievably full and complete and vital way in terms of relationships. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I wrote about 100 page, 100, I published 100 things about that experience, though most people don't know that that's what I did. And I always thought to myself, how did a plant explain mathematics? And of course, it works because the mathematics was already embedded in the substrate of a mammalian brain. And it was the mixture so anyway, that was it for me. I realized plants are mysterious things that require a lot more exploration.
Roth, do you want to share your experience?
First, I want to answer what the last words of Sanford, that he said if the plants knows mathematics. No, the plants doesn't know mathematics, but the plants liberate the DMT in your pineal, so you have more capacity. For example, in one occasion, I have a similar experience that I have the ability, was when the first time taking ayahuasca, that I can do 5 things at the same time. For example, mathematics at the maximum level that I one time get. I was comparing cognitive science with Buddhism. That is something that if you ask me now, I can talk about that. I forget it, but I don't forget it. It's in my mind. So if 4 or 5 things that I had in my mind, but I don't remember in my short memory, I can access with the ayahuasca and resolve the 5 at the maximum capacity that once I have in these things, but simultaneously, and at the same time, I am focusing some analysis of law relationship, and all the time same time I completely aware of what's happening and what is my state. So I think that what we get is the maximum, more possibilities of your brain. So you are access to part of your brain that you don't normally use. In other experience, I thought that I have been to heaven and I can describe the heaven and say, well, I get an experience of illumination. But after many more times, I have another experience and was so far more deep that I say, wow, so the other ones was not the heavens. There are more. So I think that we are exploring the illimited capacity of our brains. So we are living in the 1%, or because I asked some masters in Amazonia and say, what are you experiencing? Because they have experience with 100 plants. I have experience with 12. They have with 100 each time. So they drink 100 plants at the same time, and this in the dreams they can separate the relationship with each one and recover the energy they have to heal people, because they are shamans. They heal people with these capacities, and they say they have been in this for 40 years. And they say, well, when I compare with my master, the knowledge of my master, what I know is absolutely infinitesimal. And my master says the same. So I think that this is something absolutely infinite for our point of view. that we are discovering. So every time we feel that we discover everything, but we are just in the surface of an experience. So, well, and respect to the question of Victoria, I don't know if I understand exactly what she questioned, but what I feel is that we are being cooking in our own juices along this COVID experience in our own caves, and we are hearing the calling from the outside world, the nature, the life, and the seeds, as Ron says, represent an opportunity to get out of our concept of our cave. And I think that COVID make fast or exacerbate the feeling that we had of be in our cave. And it's a great opportunity because people are more aware of eco problems and looking for solution and start farming. And a lot of people along the COVID start farming in at least around the place where we live, and they feel the call of the farm, of the nature to. So I think this is something beautiful, no? This is what Victoria questioned. I don't know if I understand correctly. Why the people is now looking for some greenery experience? This is what she asked.
No, I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Sanford.
No, I just wanted to remind him that what we were trying to respond with were the first moment where something. What was it? Where we came to believe that plants could teach.
Okay. Yes, they can.
It's interesting, as you are talking, all of you were recalling these memories. I could not come up with that particular moment, but there's something that comes to my mind is I know that there was at some point a certain change in me of thinking about what empathy means. And maybe that's something I can share. I realized that when you start becoming aware of this incredible connection with plants and how plants actually are our way of connecting us to, well, the sun, and they are that medium that basically embeds us in nature in some way, that we are one with plants, with other organisms, is that it's a moment to actually think about empathy, not as something that we feel towards an individual, but perhaps a way to actually establish an effective connection with an expanded self. And to me, plants are this way of rethinking what the self means, that it's something that is really continuous, and there's no separation between us and the plants and the rest of life. So that made me change the way I think about empathy. But I will think, Victoria, about that moment and definitely include all of those recollections in the book. Thank you so much for being here. It was an incredibly, to me, open and honest conversation, and very heterogeneous, which I really enjoyed, with very different voices. And thanks again for making the time for this. Thank you.
Thank you. It was amazing.
Thank you.
It was a treat. Thank you so much. And I hope to see some of you again and see some of you for the first time in the future.
Thank you, Michelle, for staying with us till the end. Thank you.
I just want to say how strange it is how many of us, all but Eduardo, I believe, who live in big bad cities.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon, and I will be in touch.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.